Tonight, we will explore the nature of greed and how taking too much from the world leaves us with nothing at all. Settle in now. Let your body find its place of rest. Feel the surface beneath you, solid and supporting, asking nothing of you. Let your head grow heavy against the pillow. Let your hands fall open. Let your jaw soften, your tongue release from the roof of your mouth. Your eyes close gently like curtains drawn against the evening. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nothing to fix. No problem to solve. No one you need to become. You are simply here, listening, breathing, resting. And that is more than enough. If this path calls to you, if these stories bring you peace, I invite you to subscribe so we may walk together again another night. Tonight, our stories will take us to villages and rivers, to kilns and grinding stones, to fields of golden turmeric and hives dripping with wild honey. In each place, we will meet someone who took more than their share from the world. And in each story, we will watch the world respond with its own quiet justice, not punishment, not vengeance, simply the natural consequence of pulling too hard on the threads that hold everything together. The Buddha taught that all things arise together. All things depend on one another. The bee depends on the flower. The flower depends on the bee. When we forget this, when we take without thought for what remains, we set in motion a chain of loss that always, eventually, returns to where it began. This teaching is sometimes called dependent origination, or in the ancient Pali language, pratityasamutpada. It means simply this: nothing exists alone. Everything arises because of everything else. And when we harm one part of this web, the whole web trembles, including the part where we stand. Let us begin this journey together. Take a slow breath in. Feel your chest rise gently, and let it go. Feel the warmth of your exhale against your lips. Another breath. Slower still. Let each exhale carry you a little deeper into stillness, a little closer to rest. And now, let us begin with a story about honey. There once lived a man named Bharat in a region of low hills covered in wild flowers and dense forest. He was a honey gatherer, as his father had been, and his father's father before that. He knew the forests the way a weaver knows thread. He knew which trees the bees favored, which flowers bloomed earliest in the spring, which cliffs held colonies so old that the wax had turned dark as riverstone. Bharat was good at his work, strong and patient. He would rise before dawn, when the air was still cool and the bees were slow, and he would walk the forest paths with a clay pot of smoking herbs and a long curved knife his grandfather had made. The smoke calmed the bees. The knife freed the comb, and Bharat would take what he needed, carefully, leaving enough for the colony to rebuild, enough for the bees to survive the lean months, enough for the flowers to be pollinated and bloom again. This was the way his father had taught him. His father's voice still lived in his memory, clear as birdsong. Take half, Bharat. Always half. The other half belongs to the bees. It is their wages for the work they do. It is the rent you pay for living in their world. And for many years, Bharat followed this teaching. He was not wealthy, but he was comfortable. His honey was known in 3 villages for its golden color and its taste of wildflowers. He traded it for rice, for cloth, for the small things a family needs. His wife Meera kept their home. His 2 children grew strong. The forest provided. There were other honey gatherers in the region. Old Pavan, who worked the eastern slopes. A woman named Devi, who knew the cliff colonies better than anyone alive. Young Suresh, who was still learning, still sometimes clumsy with the smoke pot, but getting better each season. They all followed the same way. Take half, leave half. Trust the bees to do what bees have always done. And the bees did. Season after season, the colonies grew and split and spread. New hives appeared in hollow trees, in rock crevices, under the eaves of abandoned buildings. The forest hummed with life. The flowers bloomed in carpets of white and gold and pale purple, and the honey flowed. Then came the season that changed everything for Bharat. It was late spring, and the rains had been generous that year. The forest was thick with blossoms. Bharat had ventured farther than usual, following an old game trail into a part of the forest he rarely visited. The trees grew tall here, their canopies filtering the sunlight into soft green columns. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something sweet and heavy. The unmistakable perfume of a very large hive. He followed the scent, through a stand of bamboo, past a fallen tree draped in moss, up a gentle rise. And there, in the hollow of an ancient banyan tree whose trunk was as wide as a small house, he found it. The largest wild hive he had ever seen. It filled the entire hollow of the tree, from the opening near the base to somewhere high above where the trunk split into massive branches. Honeycomb hung in golden curtains, layer upon layer, thick with honey so dark and rich it seemed to glow in the dim light. Bees moved across the surface in their patient thousands, their hum like a low, continuous prayer. Bharat stood very still. His breath caught in his chest. He had seen large hives before. His father had once shown him a colony that filled a cliff face, and they had harvested from it for 3 seasons. But this was something else entirely. This was a colony that must have been growing for decades, perhaps longer. Undiscovered, untouched, the accumulated sweetness of countless seasons, stored in wax cells built by generations of bees who had lived and died and passed their work to the next generation, and the next, and the next. He felt something stir in his chest, not the quiet gratitude he usually felt when he found a good hive. Something sharper, something hungrier. He looked at the honey, and he thought about the merchant who had visited his village last month. The merchant had spoken of a town 3 days' journey south where honey fetched twice the usual price, where wealthy families used it in medicines and sweets and offerings at the temple, where a man with enough honey could buy a proper house, could send his children to be educated, could give his wife the silver bangles she admired in the market but never asked for. Bharat looked at the honey. He thought about taking half, as his father had taught him. Then he thought about how much honey was here, more than he could carry in a single trip, more than he could carry in 10 trips. And he thought about the merchant's words, and the silver bangles, and the house. The bees will rebuild, he told himself. They always do. And I will take a little more than usual, just this once. The hive is so large, they will barely notice. But even as he said these words, standing there in the soft green light beneath the ancient banyan tree, he knew that a little more was not what he was thinking about. He was thinking about all of it. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel your breath moving in and out, gentle and steady, like a tide on a calm shore. Notice how your body has settled into stillness, how the surface beneath you holds you without effort. There is nowhere else you need to be. This moment is complete. And now, let us return to Bharat, standing before the great hive. He went home that evening and said nothing to Mira about what he had found. He lay awake in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night, crickets in the thatch, the distant call of an owl, his children's soft breathing in the next room, and in his mind, The golden curtains of honeycomb glowed and glowed. The next morning, he rose earlier than usual. He took his largest clay pots, all 6 of them. He took his smoke pot and his knife. He took a length of rope and a large piece of cloth, and he walked back into the forest. When he reached the banyan tree, the bees were just beginning to stir in the early light. He lit his smoke pot and let the thick gray clouds drift into the hollow of the tree. The hum of the colony changed, became slower, confused. The bees began to cluster together, retreating from the smoke, clinging to each other in drowsy balls. Bharat began to cut. He started at the edges, as he always did, slicing through the comb with his grandfather's curved knife. Honey flowed over his hands, warm and thick and impossibly sweet. He filled one pot, then another. He worked his way deeper into the hollow, cutting more aggressively now, pulling away sheets of comb that dripped and oozed. Normally, this is where he would stop. Look at the remaining comb. Judge what was enough for the colony to survive. Step back, give thanks, walk away. But today, he did not stop. He told himself he would stop after filling the 6 pots. But when the 6 pots were full, the hive still stretched upward, golden and abundant. He wrapped comb in the cloth. When the cloth was full, he told himself he would stop. But then he thought of one more trip. Just one more. He went home, emptied his pots into the large storage jars Mira used for preserving fruit, and went back. Mira watched him go, confusion on her face. "Why so many trips?" she asked. He did not answer. The second time, he was less careful. He cut deeper, faster. Honey ran down the bark of the tree in golden rivers. Bees that had escaped the smoke returned and buzzed around him, confused, searching for the comb that was no longer there. He brushed them away. Some stung him. He barely noticed. He filled his pots again, carried them home, went back a 3rd time. By the 3rd trip, the hollow of the tree was nearly empty. What had been a cathedral of wax and honey was now a stripped, sticky cave. Fragments of comb hung from the walls. Dead bees lay in the honey that had pooled at the base. The survivors clustered in tight, motionless balls, their hum reduced to something barely audible. A sound like grief, a sound like the last breath of something ancient. Bharat stood in the hollow and looked at what remained. A few pieces of comb, dark and old, mostly brood comb where the next generation of bees was developing. Larvae curled in their cells, white and helpless. Some of the cells had been cut open by his knife, their contents spilling. His father's voice came to him then, distant but clear. "Take half, Bharat, always half." He looked at the remaining comb. He looked at his empty pots. He cut the last of it down. Every piece, every cell, every drop. He scraped the wax from the walls of the hollow. He left nothing, not a fragment of comb for the surviving bees to cluster on, not a drop of honey for them to eat, not a single cell of brood to become the next generation. He carried his pots home in the failing light, his arms aching, his body covered in stings that had begun to swell. Mira gasped when she saw him. His hands were swollen to twice their normal size. His face was puffy, one eye nearly closed, but he was smiling. "Look," he said, gesturing to the jars that now lined the wall of their home. 18 pots of honey, more than he normally gathered in 2 full seasons. A fortune in golden sweetness. Mira looked at the honey. She looked at his swollen face. She looked at the spots of blood on his shirt, where stingers were still embedded in his skin. "Bharat," she said quietly, "where did you leave the bees?" He waved her question away like a bee near his face. "They will rebuild. They always do. But something in her expression made him look away. She had grown up in this forest too. Her mother had gathered herbs, knew the plants, knew the balance of things. Mira understood what Bharat had done, even if she could not yet see the full shape of what it would mean. In the weeks that followed, Bharat was busy. He traveled to the town the merchant had spoken of and sold his honey for prices that made him dizzy with excitement. He bought the silver bangles for Mira. He bought new clothes for his children. He bought tools he did not need and a goat he did not have time to tend. He felt like a man who had discovered a secret door in a wall he had walked past his entire life. But something else was happening in the forest, something quiet and slow and irreversible. The colony in the banyan tree was dead, not dying. Dead, without comb, without honey stores, without brood to replace the aging workers. The surviving bees had dispersed. Some joined other colonies. Most simply died, alone, on leaves and branches, their bodies curling inward as the life left them. And because that colony had been so large, because it had been sending out swarms for decades, seeding new colonies across the forest, its death rippled outward. The new colonies it would have produced never came into being. The flowers that those bees would have pollinated set less fruit. The trees that depended on those bees for reproduction produced fewer seeds. Bharat noticed none of this. He was counting coins and planning what to buy next. The following spring, he returned to his usual gathering routes, expecting the normal abundance. But the forest was quieter than he remembered. The hum that usually filled the air in spring, that constant low vibration that meant the bees were working, was thinner, fainter. In some areas, absent entirely. He found his first regular hive. It was smaller than last year. He took his half and moved on. The second hive was gone entirely, the tree hollow empty. A few flakes of old wax, the only evidence it had ever been there. The third hive was present but struggling, the colony small and sluggish. By the end of his first gathering trip, he had filled only 2 pots. A normal spring would yield 8 or 10. He told himself the season was unusual. The rains had come late. The flowers had bloomed unevenly. Next year would be better. Next year was not better. Next year was worse. The area around the great banyan tree, which had once been the richest part of the forest for honey gathering, was now silent. No bees, no hum. Even the flowers seemed fewer, their colors less vivid, their petals thinner. Without the bees to pollinate them, many plants had failed to reproduce. Without the plants, the insects that fed on them had moved elsewhere. Without the insects, the birds had gone quiet. The forest was becoming a ghost of itself, and the ghost was spreading outward from the hollow of that ancient tree, like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Meanwhile, old Pavan continued to gather on the eastern slopes, where his careful harvesting had kept the colonies strong. Devi still climbed to her cliff colonies, which thrived under her respectful care. Young Suresh, now more skilled, found new hives in the areas where the ecosystem remained intact. They all noticed the decline in Bharat's territory. They all knew why. Pavan said nothing. He was not the kind of man who spoke about other people's mistakes. But when Bharat came to him asking to gather in the eastern slopes, Pavan shook his head. "These colonies know me," he said. "I take half. They expect me. If another hand reaches in, the balance shifts." Devi was more direct. "You ate the mother hive, Bharat, the one that fed all the others. Now the others are dying because you could not leave enough for them to live." Bharat's face flushed with anger and shame. "I needed the money," he said. Devi looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were the color of dark honey. "You needed the money once," she said. "Now you need it every day, and the forest cannot give it to you." This story shows us how greed destroys the source of abundance. Bharat discovered that the great hive was not simply a store of honey to be emptied. It was a living system, a mother colony whose existence supported an entire web of life. Buddhism teaches the principle of dependent origination, that nothing exists independently. The bees depended on the flowers depended on the bees. Bharat depended on both. When he severed one connection, the entire web began to unravel. When we take more than our share from any source, whether it is nature, relationships, or community, we do not simply reduce what is available. We damage the capacity of the source to regenerate, and in damaging that capacity, we ultimately destroy our own livelihood, our own sweetness, our own future. Let us rest here for a moment. Notice your breathing. Feel how it has slowed since we began. Each breath a little longer, a little deeper, a little more natural. Your body knows how to breathe. You do not need to guide it. Simply notice. Simply feel. The rise, the fall, the brief, peaceful pause between. And now, let us explore another story. This one is about a different kind of greed, not the taking of honey from bees, but the taking of dignity from a family in the name of tradition. In a prosperous village known for its cotton fields and its weavers, there lived a man named Arvind. He was a landowner, respected, and, in the way of such villages, feared. He had worked hard in his youth, and his fields produced well, and over the years he had accumulated enough wealth to be considered one of the leading men of the district. He had a fine house with a courtyard. He had cattle. He had 2 children, a daughter named Sita and a son, younger by 3 years, whose name was Vikram. Arvind loved his children in the way he loved his land, fiercely, possessively, with an eye always on their value. When Sita came of age, she was beautiful, dark-eyed, graceful, skilled in the household arts her mother had taught her. She could embroider cloth so finely that the stitches seemed to disappear into the fabric. She could sing. She could prepare medicines from garden herbs. She was, by any measure, a daughter any family would be proud to welcome. And Arvind was proud. But his pride had a sharp edge. When families began to inquire about Sita, sending intermediaries to discuss the possibility of marriage, Arvind saw an opportunity. His daughter was valuable. Her beauty was valuable. His family's reputation was valuable. And in his mind, value should be paid for in full. He set a dowry price so high that the first 3 families withdrew immediately. The amounts he demanded in gold, in land, in cattle, in goods were not merely generous. They were crushing. They were the kind of sums that would require a family to borrow heavily, to mortgage their future, to spend years in debt to pay for a single day's ceremony. Sita's mother, a quiet woman named Padma, tried to reason with him. "The dowry should be fair," she said one evening as they sat in the courtyard after the children had gone to sleep. "It should show respect, but it should not break the other family. What kind of life will Sita have if her husband's family resents the price they paid for her?" Arvind dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "They will pay because she is worth paying for. And once the marriage is done, they will forget the cost. Everyone does." Padma looked at her hands in her lap. She did not believe this. She had seen marriages built on resentment. She knew how debt could poison a household like slow-acting venom, invisible at first, then felt in every meal, every conversation, every silence. But Arvind's mind was made, and in that household, Arvind's mind was the only one that mattered. Eventually, a family agreed to his terms. They were from a village 2 days' journey east, a family of modest landowners who had one son, a young man named Rajan. Rajan was quiet and hardworking. He had gentle hands and a reputation for fairness. He had seen Sita once at a festival, and he had told his parents simply, "She is the one I would like to marry." And so his parents came to Arvind, and Arvind named his price, and Rajan's parents looked at each other with something heavy passing between them. But their son had asked, and they loved their son, and so they agreed. They borrowed from the moneylender in their village. They sold a portion of their best land. They melted down Rajan's mother's wedding jewelry, gold that had been in the family for 4 generations. They scraped and borrowed and sacrificed until they had assembled everything Arvind demanded. Every coin, every measure of grain, every head of cattle. The wedding was magnificent. Arvind made sure of that. He wanted everyone to see what his daughter was worth. Musicians played. Garlands of marigolds hung from every doorway. The food was abundant, the sweets elaborate, the ceremony performed by the most respected priest in the district. Sita wore red silk embroidered with gold thread. She looked like a queen. But beneath the silk, her heart was uneasy. She had heard the whispers. She knew what Rajan's family had paid. She had seen the lines of worry on Rajan's mother's face during the ceremony, lines that had nothing to do with losing a son and everything to do with the debt that would follow them home. Let us pause here and breathe. Feel the weight of your body against the bed. Feel how gravity holds you, gentle and constant, like a hand on your shoulder. You are safe here. You are held. Let your next breath be the slowest breath you have taken all day. Let it fill you like warm water fills a cup, and then let it go. Let it all go. There is nothing you need to carry tonight, not even these stories. Let them wash over you like rain on a field. Take what soaks in. Let the rest flow away. Now let us return to Sita in her new home. The first months of marriage were difficult in ways that no one spoke about openly. Rajan was kind to Sita. He was a good man. But kindness lives in a house, and when the house is full of debt, kindness finds itself crowded into smaller and smaller rooms. Rajan's parents could not look at Sita without calculating. The gold they had borrowed to pay her dowry charged interest. Every season, the debt grew, like a vine climbing a wall, reaching into every corner of their lives. They ate less. They worked longer hours. They sold another piece of land, then another. The farm that had comfortably supported the family for generations was shrinking, consumed by the weight of what they owed. And slowly, imperceptibly, resentment grew. It did not come all at once. It came in small moments. A sharp word from Rajan's mother when Sita used too much oil in cooking. A silence from Rajan's father when Sita entered a room. A look exchanged between them over dinner. A look that said, without words, "This is what she cost us. This is what we paid." Rajan tried to shield Sita from this, but he was drowning too. The debt was his to manage now, and it pressed on him like a stone on his chest. He worked from before dawn until after dark. He took on extra labor for other farmers. He was always tired, always worried. And tired, worried men do not always have patience, do not always have gentleness, do not always remember that the woman sitting across from them at dinner did not set the price, did not choose the terms, did not ask to be sold so dearly. The first time Rajan spoke harshly to Sita, she flinched as if struck. He had come home after learning that the moneylender was increasing the interest on their loan. He was exhausted. His hands were blistered from work that should have been done by hired laborers they could no longer afford. "Your father," he said, and the way he said the word father was like spitting out a seed. "Your father took everything from us and gave us what? A wife who cannot even work the fields." Sita said nothing. She stood very still, her hands at her sides, and looked at the floor. The embroidered cloth she had been working on lay on the table between them, its delicate stitches forming a pattern of flowers that would never bloom. This was the first time. It was not the last. Over the months and years that followed, the harshness grew, not into violence, not at first, but into something almost worse, a constant grinding cruelty of words and silences. Rajan began to see Sita not as his wife, but as the living symbol of his family's ruin. Every time he looked at her, he saw the debt, the lost land, his mother's empty wrists where the gold bangles used to be, and Sita, who had done nothing wrong, who had not set the price, who had come to this marriage with hope and an open heart. Sita began to shrink. She spoke less. She smiled less. She spent her days in the small room at the back of the house, embroidering cloth that no one would buy, her fingers moving in patterns her mother had taught her, the only comfort she had left. She wrote letters to her mother, Padma, but she could not bring herself to write the truth. "I am well," she wrote. "Rajan is kind. The harvest was good." Lies stitched as carefully as the flowers on her cloth. Padma, reading these letters in Arvind's fine house, sensed the emptiness beneath the words. She knew her daughter's handwriting. She knew the way Sita formed her letters when she was happy, loose and flowing, and the way she formed them when she was troubled, small and tight and controlled. These letters were written in a hand that had forgotten how to be loose. But Padma said nothing to Arvind. What could she say? He would not hear it. He was too busy counting the wealth the marriage had brought, admiring the cattle in his yard, pointing out to visitors the additions he had made to his house with Sita's bride price. Years passed. 3, 5, 7. The debt was not yet paid. Rajan's family had lost more than half their original land. Rajan himself had aged beyond his years, his gentle hands now rough and cracked, his quiet nature hardened into something brittle. He rarely spoke to Sita, except to give instructions or to remind her, in that cold, flat voice, of what she had cost. And then the time came for Vikram, Arvind's son, to marry. Vikram was a good young man, not brilliant, not remarkable, but steady and honest and willing to work. He had his mother's gentleness and his father's determination, but without the sharp edge that made Arvind's determination so dangerous. He was ready for marriage. He wanted a family of his own, a home, children, the ordinary, beautiful things that ordinary people build their lives around. Arvind sent intermediaries to the families in the district. He expected the process to go smoothly. His family was wealthy. His son was of good character. There would be many families eager to arrange a match. The intermediaries returned one by one with the same answer. No. The first family declined politely. Previous commitments. The second family was more direct. They had heard about Sita's dowry. They had heard about the debt. They had heard about how Rajan's family had been destroyed by Arvind's demands. They would not negotiate with a man who priced his children like livestock. The third family, the fourth, the fifth, all the same. Word had spread, as word always does in communities bound by marriage and trade and the long memories of neighbors. Arvind had demanded too much for Sita, and the cost of that demand had become a story told in every household in the district. A cautionary tale, a warning. Do not deal with Arvind. He will take everything you have and call it fair. Arvind raged. He sent more intermediaries to more distant villages. He offered incentives. He lowered his demands for Vikram's bride. But the reputation preceded him. Families who had never met him had heard the story. The moneylender in Rajan's village had told other moneylenders. The families who had withdrawn from negotiations for Sita had told other families. The web of gossip and warning had grown until Arvind's name was synonymous with a single word: greed. Vikram waited. Season after season, he waited. He watched other young men his age marry, build homes, hold their first children. He said nothing to his father, but the silence between them grew heavy with all the things he did not say. One afternoon, Sita came home to visit. She had been married 7 years. She was thinner than Padma remembered. Her eyes, once bright, had a quality of distance, as if she were always looking at something far away that no one else could see. She wore no jewelry. Her clothes were clean but plain. Padma held her daughter in the courtyard and felt the bones of her shoulders through the fabric of her sari, and she wept without making a sound. That evening, the family sat together for a meal. Arvind, Padma, Vikram, and Sita. The food was good. Arvind's house was comfortable. The cattle lowed softly in the yard. From the outside, it looked like a prosperous family enjoying a peaceful evening. Sita looked at her brother. She saw the loneliness in him. She had heard about the failed negotiations, the rejected proposals. She saw how he sat, slightly apart from everyone else, as if he had already begun to accept a life lived alone. She looked at her father. He was eating steadily, his jaw working, his eyes on his plate. He had not asked about her life with Rajan. He never did. He asked about the household, the cattle, the crops. He asked about things that could be counted and measured. He did not ask about the things that mattered. And something in Sita, something that had been held down for 7 years under the weight of silence and stitched together pretending, rose to the surface. "Father," she said. Arvind looked up. "You priced me so high that I became worthless." The words hung in the air of the courtyard like smoke that would not clear. Rajan's family paid everything they had for me, and because they paid everything, they have nothing left. Not money, not land, not kindness. They look at me and they see the debt. That is all I am to them now. A debt with a face. Arvind opened his mouth to speak, but Sita was not finished. "And my brother," she said, her voice steady now, quiet but clear as water over stone. "My brother pays the cost of what you demanded for me. No family will deal with you. No family will send their daughter into the household of a man who drains other households dry. Vikram sits alone because of the price you put on my head." She looked at her brother again. "You priced me so high I became worthless," she said, "and my brother paid the cost." The courtyard was silent. The cattle had stopped lowing. Even the evening insects seemed to pause. Padma sat with her hands pressed together in her lap, tears running silently down her face. Vikram stared at the ground, and Arvind sat with his food untouched before him, his mouth open, his jaw still. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his son. He looked at the fine house he had built with the wealth of a ruined family. And for the first time, he saw what it had cost. Not in coins, not in cattle, not in land, in his daughter's hollow eyes, in his son's loneliness, in the silence that filled his courtyard, like water filling a well, cold and dark and very, very deep. This story shows us how greed in human relationships destroys the bonds that sustain us. Arvind discovered that placing an excessive price on his daughter did not increase her value. It destroyed it. Buddhism teaches that attachment to gain, what is called lobha in the Pali language, meaning greed or grasping, blinds us to the true nature of what we hold. When we treat people as commodities, when we measure love in coins and cattle, we shatter the web of trust and care that families depend on. When we demand too much from others, we do not become richer. We become isolated. And isolation, as Vikram knew, is its own kind of poverty. Let us rest now. Feel your body sinking a little deeper. The bed holds you. The darkness holds you. The breath holds you. You are held by so many things tonight, and none of them ask anything in return. Let your shoulders release. Let your hands be soft. Let your face relax. The muscles around your eyes, the muscles of your forehead, all softening, all releasing, all letting go. Breathe in, breathe out. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to plan. Just this breath, just this moment, just this gentle rest. And when you are ready, we will continue our journey. There are more stories ahead, more lives to witness, more teachings to receive. But there is no rush. They will wait for you. Everything waits for you tonight. Let us move now to the edge of a river, a wide river, brown with silt after the rains, dangerous in the way that water is dangerous, patient and powerful, and utterly indifferent to the plans of the people who live along its banks. On this river, there once worked a boatman named Kavi. He was a lean man, strong in the shoulders from years of rowing, with hands calloused from the oar and eyes permanently narrowed against the glare of sun on water. He knew the river, the way Bharat knew the forest, intimately, respectfully, as a living thing with moods and seasons and secrets. Kavi operated the only ferry crossing for half a day's journey in either direction. The river was too wide and too treacherous to swim, too deep to ford, too swift for any but the most experienced boatmen to navigate, and Kavi was the most experienced. He had grown up on this river. His father had operated the same ferry. His grandfather had carved the first boat from a single great log. For most of the year, Kavi charged a fair price. A few coins for a person, a little more for a cart, enough to feed his family and maintain his boat. The villagers on both sides of the river considered him a necessary part of life, like the blacksmith or the well. He was there. He was reliable. He did his work. They paid his fare. But the river had its seasons, and Kavi had learned to read them not just for navigation, but for profit. When the monsoon came, the river transformed. The calm brown waterway became a churning, debris-filled torrent. Whole trees tumbled past. The water rose above its banks, flooding the low-lying fields. The current became deadly. No one could cross without a boat, and no boat could cross without a boatman of extraordinary skill. And this is when Kavi changed his prices. During the floods, when travelers arrived at the riverbank desperate to cross, when merchants needed to move goods before they spoiled, when families needed to reach sick relatives on the other side, when pilgrims heading to festivals could not turn back, Kavi would look at their faces. He would assess their desperation, and he would name a price. Not double, not triple, sometimes 10 times, sometimes 20 times. Whatever he thought they could bear, whatever he thought the river of their need would carry. "The river is angry today," he would say, shaking his head slowly, looking out at the churning water with an expression of great concern. "Very dangerous. I risk my life each crossing. You understand?" And they would pay. What choice did they have? The sick relative was waiting. The goods were spoiling. The festival would not wait. The river was impassable without Kavi, and Kavi knew it, and he held that knowledge the way a man holds a knife, carefully, with full awareness of its edge. There was a merchant named Darshan who crossed regularly, bringing spices from the south to the markets in the north. During the dry months, he and Kavi had an easy relationship. A fair price, a smooth crossing, sometimes a shared meal on the riverbank while waiting for the current to settle. Darshan would tell stories of the towns he had visited. Kavi would share news from both sides of the river. They were not friends exactly, but they were familiar, comfortable, two men whose lives intersected at a point of water. But during the monsoon, Darshan's face would tighten when he approached the crossing. He knew what was coming. He had his cartload of turmeric and cardamom, goods that would lose their value if they sat too long in the damp air. He needed to cross, and Kavi would be standing there, leaning on his oar, that look of exaggerated concern on his face. "How much today?" Darshan would ask, and Kavi would name a sum that made Darshan's stomach clench. "That is robbery," Darshan said once, his voice tight. Kavi shrugged. "The river sets the price, not me. You are welcome to swim." He gestured toward the water, where a tangle of branches and mud churned past with the slow violence of something that could not be reasoned with. Darshan paid. He always paid. They all paid. There was a widow named Lakshmi who lived on the eastern bank and whose only son lived on the western bank. Her son's wife was expecting their first child. When the floods came that year, word arrived that the birth had begun early and there were complications. The midwife needed herbs that only grew on the eastern side. Lakshmi gathered the herbs and came to the river. She was an old woman. She had very little money. She stood on the bank with her bundle of herbs, the rain soaking through her thin sari, and she asked Kavi to take her across. Kavi looked at the herbs. He looked at the old woman. He looked at the river. 30 coins, he said. Lakshmi's face went pale. 30 coins was more than she earned in a month of selling vegetables in the market. "Please," she said, "my son's wife, the baby, these herbs could save them." 30 coins, Kavi said again. His voice was not cruel. It was simply flat, the voice of a man stating a fact. Water is wet. The sky is blue. The crossing costs 30 coins. Lakshmi went from house to house in the rain, borrowing coins from neighbors who had little to spare. It took her 2 hours. By the time she returned with the money, trembling and soaked, the river had risen further. Kavi looked at the water. 40 coins now, he said. The river is higher. Something broke in Lakshmi's face. Not anger, something deeper. A recognition of helplessness so complete, it was almost peaceful. The way a drowning person is said to become calm in the final moments. She stood in the rain and looked at Kavi, and what he saw in her eyes made him look away. She found the extra coins. She crossed. The herbs arrived in time. The baby survived. But Lakshmi never forgot those hours in the rain, and neither did anyone who heard the story. Let us pause here. Notice your breath. Feel how it moves through you without effort, without thought. Your body breathes for you. It has been breathing for you since the moment you were born. Trust it now. Let it carry you. Let each exhale be a small release, a small surrender, a small letting go. You are safe. You are warm. You are resting. Now, let us return to the river. Years passed in this way. Each monsoon season, Kavi's prices climbed. Each year, he squeezed a little more from the desperate travelers who had no other way across. His house grew larger. He added a second room, then a third. He bought better clothes. He ate richer food. He kept his old boat, though. He was not foolish. The boat was his livelihood, and he maintained it carefully, replacing planks, sealing seams, keeping it strong against the river's constant wearing. But he did not maintain the other things, the things that could not be patched with pitch and planed wood. The villagers on both banks had begun to speak differently about Kavi. Where once they had said, "the boatmen," with the same neutral tone they used for the blacksmith or the potter, now they said his name with something else, a tightness, a bitterness, the way you say the name of a sickness you have learned to live with but never accepted. They told stories about him, Lakshmi's story, Darshan's story, the story of the pilgrim family who had spent their entire savings for a festival crossing and arrived at the temple with empty hands and nothing to offer. The story of the farmer whose oxen had been stranded on the wrong side of the river during planting season because he could not afford Kavi's flood price, and whose crops failed that year and whose family went hungry through the winter. Each story was a thread, and threads, when woven together, make cloth, and cloth, when it is large enough, can become a sail or a shroud. Kavi heard the stories. He heard the resentment in the voices of his neighbors. He felt the way people moved aside when he walked through the market, not in respect but in avoidance, the way you step around something unpleasant on the road. He noticed that no one invited him to festivals anymore, that children fell silent when he passed, that even the tea seller, who was friendly to everyone, served him without conversation, setting down the cup and turning away. But Kavi told himself it did not matter. He had his house, he had his money, he had his boat. What did he need with the good opinion of people who could not even afford to cross a river? They are jealous, he told himself. They wish they had what I have. That is all. And he continued as before. Then came the season of the great flood. It arrived without the usual warnings. Normally, the river rose gradually over days, giving people time to prepare, to move belongings to higher ground, to secure their animals. But that year, something had changed upstream. A landslide, perhaps, or an unusual pattern of rain in the mountains. The river rose overnight, surging over its banks with a roar that woke the villages in darkness. By morning, the eastern bank was underwater. Homes were flooding, families scrambled to higher ground, carrying children and whatever they could save. The water was brown and violent, full of debris, moving with a force that pulled at the legs of anyone who tried to wade through it. And Kavi's house, built close to the river for convenience, was among the first to flood. He woke to water around his ankles. By the time he had gathered his money box and his most valuable possessions, the water was at his knees. He waded to his boat, secured it to a high post, and climbed aboard. From there, he watched the river consume his house. The walls held for a time, then the mud bricks softened and the current pushed through, and the rooms he had added, one by one, filled with brown water and began to dissolve. His money box was safe. His boat was strong. He was alive. But all around him, others were not so fortunate. He could hear them calling, from rooftops, from trees, from the upper floors of houses that were slowly being pulled apart by the current. Families stranded on shrinking islands of high ground, children crying, animals bellowing in terror. The whole world had become water, and the water was not kind. People saw Kavi in his boat. They called to him, "Kavi, please, my children are on the roof. Kavi, the water is rising. Kavi, help us." And Kavi, sitting in his boat with his money box between his feet, heard them. He looked at the churning water. He looked at the desperate faces, and something old and deep rose up in him. something that had been buried under years of calculation and self-interest. He felt it in his chest, a pull, a warmth, an impulse to push off from the post and row toward the voices. He reached for the oar. Then he stopped, because he realized something. He realized that he was afraid, not of the water. He had navigated worse floods than this. His skill had not left him. His arms were still strong. His boat was sound. He was afraid of the people. He was afraid that if he rowed to them, if he helped them onto his boat, if he carried them to safety, they would look at him the way they looked at him in the market, with that tightness, that bitterness. They would climb into his boat, and they would remember every coin he had taken from them, every desperate crossing he had turned into a transaction, every time he had looked at their need and seen only his profit. He was afraid they would sit in his boat and hate him. And so, he hesitated. The calls continued. The water rose, and Kavi sat in his boat, gripping the oar, unable to move. It was Darshan who reached him first. The merchant had been stranded on a strip of high ground with his family and several neighbors. He had spotted Kavi's boat and waded chest deep through the flood to reach it, fighting the current, nearly losing his footing twice on the submerged road. He grabbed the side of the boat, gasping, his face streaked with mud and rain. He looked up at Kavi, and Kavi braced himself for the anger, for the recrimination, for the sharp words he knew he deserved. But Darshan said only this: "My daughter is on the roof. She is 4 years old. She is alone." Kavi looked at Darshan. He looked at the water. He looked at his money box. He pushed the money box aside. He took up the oar. They reached Darshan's daughter first. She was sitting on the ridge of the roof, her small arms wrapped around a wooden post, her face blank with a terror too large for tears. Kavi held the boat steady while Darshan climbed the half-submerged wall and lifted her down. She clung to her father's neck and did not make a sound. They went to the next rooftop, and the next. Kavi rowed with a ferocity he had not felt in years, his shoulders burning, his hands raw on the oar. He pulled people from trees, from walls, from floating debris. He carried them to the high ground on the western bank, where the floods had not reached. Trip after trip, family after family, hour after hour. He did not think about money. He did not calculate the cost. He did not look at faces and assess what they could pay. He simply rowed, back and forth across the churning water, his old boat groaning with the weight of passengers, the current pulling at him like a living thing trying to drag him under. By late afternoon, the water had begun to recede. Kavi had made more crossings than he could count. His arms were lead. His hands were bleeding where the oar had worn through the calluses he had built over a lifetime. He sat in his empty boat on the western bank and stared at the river as it slowly retreated, leaving behind a landscape of mud and wreckage and loss. People were gathered on the bank, families reunited, children wrapped in borrowed cloth. The sounds of weeping and relief mixed together until they became a single sound, the sound of people who had survived something terrible and were only now allowing themselves to feel it. Kavi sat apart from them. He was very tired. His money box was gone. Somewhere during the crossings, it had tipped overboard, and he had watched it disappear into the brown water without reaching for it. He had not even paused in his rowing. After a time, old Lakshmi came and sat beside him. She said nothing for a long while. They watched the river together, its fury spent, its surface settling into something almost calm, reflecting the gray sky and the first break of blue near the horizon. "You came," she said finally. Kavi looked at his bleeding hands. I should have come sooner." "Yes," she said. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, simply the truth, stated plainly, like a stone placed on the ground. "I was afraid," he said. "Of the water? Of you, all of you, of what you think of me." Lakshmi considered this. She was quiet for so long that Kavi thought she might have nothing more to say. Then she spoke. "When I stood in the rain that day, with my herbs, begging you to take me across, I did not hate you. I was too frightened for my granddaughter to hate anyone. But afterward, when the fear had passed, yes, I was angry. For a long time." She paused. "But anger is heavy, Kavi. It is very heavy to carry, and I am an old woman. I have learned to set heavy things down." Kavi felt something in his throat, a tightness that had nothing to do with the cold or the river water he had swallowed during the crossings. "I cannot give back what I took," he said. "No," Lakshmi agreed. "You cannot. The coins are spent. The time is gone. My hours in the rain cannot be unrained. But the river is still here, and you are still a boatman. And tomorrow, when the water drops, people will need to cross." She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. "What will you charge them, Kavi?" He did not answer, not because he did not know, but because the answer was so simple that it seemed almost foolish to say aloud. A fair price. A fair price in flood and calm alike. A price that honored the work without exploiting the need. But that was not the end of Kavi's story. That was only the turning point. What followed was harder than the flood, harder than the rowing, harder than watching his money box sink into the brown water. What followed was the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust. Because Kavi discovered something that many people discover too late. It is easy to destroy trust. A single act of greed, a single moment of exploitation can shatter it. But rebuilding it takes years. It takes consistency. It takes showing up day after day, season after season, and being the person you should have been all along. And even then, some people will never fully trust you again. Some damage cannot be fully repaired. Some threads, once cut, can be knotted back together, but the knot remains visible, a permanent reminder of the break. Kavi rebuilt his house, smaller this time. He set fair prices, monsoon or not. He helped Lakshmi cross without charge whenever she needed to visit her granddaughter. He carried goods for Darshan at the usual rate, even during the floods, even when the crossing was dangerous, and his skill was the only thing between the merchant and the current. Slowly, the tightness in his neighbors' voices eased, not disappeared, eased. The children began to speak to him again. The tea seller offered a word or two with his cup. Darshan sat with him on the riverbank sometimes, as they had in the early days, and shared stories, though there were silences between them now that had not been there before. Comfortable silences mostly, but occasionally a silence that held the memory of a price too high, a crossing made bitter, a trust that had been broken and mended and would never be quite the same. This story shows us how exploiting others' vulnerability destroys the web of community that sustains us. Kavi discovered that his position as the only boatman gave him power, but that using that power to exploit others turned his neighbors into strangers and his livelihood into a source of shame. Buddhism teaches about right livelihood, which is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right livelihood means earning our living in a way that does not cause harm. When we profit from the desperation of others, we do not simply take their money, we take their trust. And without trust, we find ourselves alone in a boat on a rising river, unable to move. When we rebuild our lives on fairness and care, We may never fully erase the past, but we begin to weave ourselves back into the fabric of community. And that fabric, imperfect as it may be, is the only thing that holds any of us when the floods come. Let us rest here for a while. Feel your body now. Feel how it has softened since we began. Your breath moves like a slow river, in and out, in and out. The bed beneath you is the bank that holds you. The darkness around you is wide and gentle and safe. You are floating, almost, carried by something larger than yourself, something patient. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on water. If a thought comes, let it come. If it goes, let it go. You do not need to hold anything tonight. Not these stories, not their meanings, not any worry or plan or memory. Let it all float. Let it all drift. Let the river of sleep carry you where it will. And now, let us visit one more place tonight, a place of fire and earth and the slow turning of a wheel. In a town where the soil was red and rich with clay, there lived a potter named Mira. She was known throughout the region for the quality of her work. Her bowls were thin-walled and strong. Her water jars kept their contents cool even in the hottest months. Her cooking pots distributed heat so evenly that food prepared in them tasted better, or so her customers claimed. And they were not wrong. Mira had learned her craft from her aunt, a stern woman named Chandra, who had operated the same pottery for 40 years. Chandra was not a warm person. She did not offer praise easily. She did not smile at crooked pots or forgive uneven glazes. But she was a master of her art, and she had one rule that she repeated so often it became the rhythm of Mira's childhood, as constant as the turning of the wheel. The clay knows what it wants to be. Your job is to listen. Mira had not always understood this. As a girl, she had fought the clay, trying to force it into shapes she had imagined, shapes she had seen in the market or admired in wealthy households. Tall, elegant vases, intricate ceremonial vessels, things that were beautiful but impractical, things that impressed the eye but could not hold water without leaking or withstand the heat of a cooking fire, without cracking. Chandra would watch these attempts with her arms crossed and her mouth set in a thin line. When the pot inevitably collapsed or cracked, she would say nothing. She would simply point to the wheel. Start again. Listen this time. And slowly, over years, Mira had learned to listen. She learned that the red clay of their region was dense and strong but not flexible. It did not want to be stretched thin for decorative vases. It wanted to be shaped into sturdy vessels, practical things, bowls and jars and pots that served the daily needs of ordinary people. When she worked with the clay instead of against it, the forms that emerged were simple and beautiful in their simplicity. Honest shapes, shapes that fit the hand and served the purpose and lasted for years. By the time Chandra died, Mira was 35 and fully the master of her kiln. She continued making the same sturdy, practical pottery her aunt had made, and the same customers came, and the same fair prices were exchanged, and the pottery provided a modest but reliable living. Then a new road was built through the town. It was part of a larger trading route connecting the coastal cities to the inland markets. Where once the town had seen a few travelers a week, now caravans passed through daily. Merchants, officials, soldiers, pilgrims. The town grew. New shops opened. A tea house appeared, then another. An inn was built near the crossroads. Money flowed in like water finding a new channel. And the merchants who passed through noticed Mira's pottery. They admired the quality, the strength, the even firing. They asked if she could make more. Much more. They would buy everything she could produce and sell it in the coastal cities where good pottery commanded high prices. Mira felt the same stirring that Bharat had felt before the great hive, that sharp, hungry thing in the chest. The merchants were offering prices she had never imagined, more for a single large order than she usually earned in a season. She said yes. At first, the increased production was manageable. She worked longer hours, rising before dawn and continuing by lamplight after dark. She fired the kiln more frequently. She turned out bowls and jars at twice her usual pace. The quality remained high. Her hands knew the work so well that speed did not diminish skill. She was tired, but she was earning more than she ever had. The merchants were pleased. They wanted more. Mira hired a helper, a young man named Rishi, who was willing but inexperienced. She showed him how to prepare the clay, how to wedge it, how to center it on the wheel. He learned quickly, but not deeply. His pots were adequate. They held water. They withstood fire, but they lacked the quality that had made Mira's work remarkable. They were a little thicker in the walls, a little uneven in the rim, a little rough in the glaze. Mira noticed. But the merchants did not seem to care. They were buying in bulk now, loading carts with pottery wrapped in straw, heading south to the cities. They wanted quantity. They wanted to fill orders. They did not hold each bowl up to the light as Mira's local customers did, turning it in their hands, feeling the balance, admiring the curve. So Mira let Rishi's pots go out with her own. She did not mark which were hers and which were his. She told herself the quality was close enough. She told herself that no one would notice. She told herself that the money was too good to slow down for the sake of perfection. Chandra's voice came to her sometimes, in the quiet moments between the wheel and the kiln. The clay knows what it wants to be. Your job is to listen. But the voice was fainter now, drowned out by the sound of coins and the turning of a wheel that spun faster and faster and never seemed to stop. She hired a second helper, then a third. The pottery hummed with activity from dawn until well past dark. The kiln burned almost continuously, consuming wood at a rate that required Mira to buy fuel from neighboring villages because the local supply could not keep up. The red clay, which she had once dug carefully from a specific bank along the river where the mineral content was highest, now came from wherever her helpers could find it. Some of it was good, some was sandy or too wet, or mixed with stones that caused pots to crack in the firing. Mira began to spend less time at the wheel and more time managing, ordering clay, buying wood, negotiating with merchants, checking the output of her helpers, though she checked less carefully as the weeks went on because there was always another order to fill, another cart to load, another merchant waiting with coins in his hand and impatience in his eyes. The local customers noticed first. Old Prema, who had bought her cooking pots from this pottery for 20 years, came in one morning and picked up a pot from the shelf. She turned it in her hands the way she always did. She ran her thumb along the rim. She held it up to the light from the doorway. "This is not your work," she said. Mira looked up from the orders she was tallying. "It is from my pottery." "From your pottery, yes, but not from your hands." Prema set the pot down. "The rim is uneven. The wall is too thick on one side. And the glaze. Look." She pointed to a spot where the glaze had pooled, creating a rough patch that would catch food and be difficult to clean. Mira felt a flush of irritation. "It is a good pot, Prema. It will cook your rice perfectly well." Prema looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were like Chandra's eyes, Mira realized with a start. That same steady, measuring gaze. The gaze of a woman who had learned to tell the difference between what was good enough and what was good. "I did not come here for a pot that cooks rice perfectly well," Prema said quietly. "I came here for a Mira pot. I have been buying Mira pots for 20 years. I know the difference." She left without buying anything. Other local customers began to drift away. The school teacher, who had always ordered a set of small bowls for his students each year. The temple keeper, who purchased ceremonial vessels for festivals. The families who had given Mira's pottery as wedding gifts, knowing that a Mira bowl was something the new couple would use every day for the rest of their lives and think of the giver each time they lifted it. These customers went elsewhere. Some traveled to a potter in the next town, a woman named Jaya, who made fewer pots, but made each one with the care that Mira had once been known for. Some simply stopped buying new pottery altogether, keeping the old Mira pots they already owned, the ones made by Mira's own hands, the ones that were thin-walled and strong and beautiful in their simplicity. Mira told herself it did not matter. The merchants bought more than the local customers ever had. The money was better. The scale was larger. She was growing. She was successful. She was building something. But what was she building? The pottery itself told the story. Where once the shelves had held rows of vessels that seemed almost alive, each one slightly different, each one bearing the subtle signature of a skilled hand responding to the particular character of a particular lump of clay. Now the shelves held uniform rows of adequate pots, pots that functioned, pots that held water and withstood fire and served their mechanical purpose, but pots that had no soul, no conversation between maker and material, no listening. The clay had been speaking, and no one was listening anymore. Mira hired a fourth helper. She began to cut corners in the firing process, pulling pots from the kiln slightly earlier to make room for the next batch. This saved time and fuel, but it meant the clay was not fully vitrified, not fully transformed by the heat into its strongest, most durable form. The pots looked the same. They felt almost the same, but they were weaker, more porous, more likely to crack under thermal stress, more likely to absorb moisture and slowly, invisibly, begin to deteriorate from within. She did not tell the merchants about the shortened firing times. She told herself it was a minor adjustment. She told herself no one would notice. The first complaints came back 3 months later. A merchant named Gopal, who had been one of her earliest and most reliable buyers, arrived at the pottery with a cart. But instead of an empty cart ready to be filled, this cart was loaded with broken pottery. Bowls cracked in half, jars that had shattered when filled with water, cooking pots that had split on their first use over a fire, spilling food into the flames. Gopal was not angry. He was worse than angry. He was disappointed. He stood in Mira's courtyard with the shards of her reputation piled behind him and spoke in a voice that was careful and controlled and utterly without warmth. "My customers trusted me," he said. "I told them this was the best pottery in the region. I told them it was made by a master. They paid a premium because of what I told them. And now they are coming back to me with broken pots and asking for their money back. And I am giving it to them, Mira, because I am the one who made the promise. I am the one whose name they know." He paused. "I will not be buying from you again." Mira opened her mouth to explain, to make excuses, to blame the clay, the weather, the helpers. But the words died before they reached her lips because she knew, with a clarity that felt like cold water poured down her spine, that none of those things were to blame. She was to blame. She had stopped listening to the clay. She had stopped listening to her aunt's voice. She had stopped listening to old Prema, who had tried to tell her gently, in the language of a loyal customer, that something precious was being lost. She had listened instead to the sound of coins, and coins, it turned out, had only one thing to say, and they said it over and over, and it was not enough. It was never enough. Let us pause here and breathe. Let your body settle even deeper now. Feel the weight of your limbs, how heavy they have become, how willingly they rest. Your hands are soft, your feet are warm, the muscles of your back have released their holding, and you are sinking gently into the surface that supports you. Breathe in through your nose. Feel the cool air at your nostrils. Breathe out through your mouth. Feel the warmth. In, out, cool, warm. A rhythm as old as life itself, asking nothing of you, giving everything. There is nothing to fix, nothing to solve. You are simply here, resting, breathing, being carried by the night. Let us return now to Mira and the shards in her courtyard. After Gopal left, Mira sat alone in the pottery for a long time. The wheel was still. The kiln was cooling. Her helpers had gone home for the day, and the silence that filled the workspace was not peaceful. It was the silence of a place that had lost its purpose. The silence of a loom without thread, a river without water, a hive without bees. She picked up one of the broken bowls from Gopal's cart. It had cracked cleanly in two, and she could see the cross-section of the wall. The clay was pale inside, not the deep, uniform red-brown of a properly fired pot. It was under-fired. She had known this would happen. She had known it, and she had done it anyway, because the orders were waiting, and the money was good, and the wheel had to keep turning. She held the two halves of the broken bowl in her hands and thought about Chandra. Her aunt had died in this room. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in the way that old potters die, slowly, with clay under her fingernails and the smell of the kiln in her hair. In her last weeks, when she could no longer sit at the wheel, she had sat in a chair by the window and watched Mira work. She had said very little. She had not needed to. Everything she knew had already been passed on, not in words, but in the thousands of hours of shared work, the turning of the wheel, the feel of the clay, the patience of the firing. But on the last day, she had spoken. Her voice was thin, like a pot tapped with a fingernail, resonant but fragile. Mira. Yes, Auntie. The clay remembers. Mira had not understood then. She had thought it was the confusion of a dying mind, words that meant nothing, or everything, which in the end might be the same thing. But now, sitting in the silent pottery with the broken bowl in her hands, she understood. The clay remembers. It remembers how it was handled, whether it was wedged with care or thrown together in haste, whether it was centered on the wheel by patient hands or forced into shape by hurried ones, whether it was fired slowly, thoroughly, with respect for the transformation taking place inside the kiln, or whether it was rushed through the heat and pulled out before the change was complete. The clay remembers, and it tells the truth, not immediately, not obviously, but eventually, inevitably, in the cracking and the breaking and the failure. The clay tells the truth about how it was made, and no amount of glaze can cover that truth forever. Mira set the broken bowl down. She walked to the clay pit behind the pottery, the original pit that her aunt had dug decades ago, the one with the richest, purest red clay. She had not dug from this pit in months, relying instead on the cheaper, more accessible clay her helpers brought from other sources. She knelt at the edge of the pit. The clay was dark and moist, smelling of earth and iron and rain. She pressed her hand into it and felt it yield beneath her fingers, cool and dense and alive in the way that clay is alive, holding the memory of water and stone and time. She took a handful and brought it to the wheel. She sat down. She wet her hands. She placed the clay on the center of the wheel and began to spin. Slowly. Her hands found the clay. The clay found her hands. She pressed and released, feeling for the center, that invisible point around which everything turns, the stillness at the heart of the spinning. She closed her eyes. She listened. The clay rose between her fingers, thin, even, alive. She felt it respond to her touch the way it always had, before the merchants, before the helpers, before the shortcuts and the compromises. It responded to her attention, to her care, to her willingness to be present with it, fully, in this moment, in this breath, in this turning. She opened her eyes. A bowl was forming on the wheel, small, simple, perfect. She looked at it and she wept. Not from sadness, though sadness was part of it. Not from relief, though relief was there too. She wept because she had forgotten. She had forgotten what it felt like to make something beautiful. She had forgotten the quiet joy of craft performed with attention and care. She had traded that joy for coins, and the coins had purchased nothing that could replace it. The next morning, she told her helpers they could stay, but things would change. She would train them properly, the way Chandra had trained her. Slowly, with patience, with standards. The output would decrease. The merchants would have to wait or find another source. The prices would be fair, but not inflated by volume. The clay would come from the original pit. The firing would take as long as it needed. 2 of her helpers left immediately. They had been paid by the pot, and slower work meant less money. Mira did not try to stop them. The 3rd helper, a young woman named Vani, stayed. She stayed because she had watched Mira at the wheel the previous evening, watched her shape that small, simple bowl with her eyes closed, and she had seen something she wanted to learn. Not how to make pots faster, how to make them true. The merchants were not happy. Some took their business elsewhere. Others reduced their orders. The river of money that had been flowing through Mira's pottery slowed to a stream, then a trickle. But something else happened. Old Prema came back. She walked into the pottery one morning, picked up a bowl from the shelf, the new shelf, the shelf where only Mira's own work and Vani's improving efforts were displayed. She turned the bowl in her hands. She ran her thumb along the rim. She held it up to the light. She smiled. "There you are," she said to the bowl, as if greeting an old friend who had been away for a long time and was finally home. This story shows us how greed corrupts not just our output, but our craft and our character. Mira discovered that the pressure to produce more, to earn more, to grow without limit, destroyed the very quality that had made her work valuable. Buddhism teaches about right effort, the understanding that the way we do things matters as much as what we achieve. The Buddha spoke of the middle way, the path between extremes. Mira had abandoned the middle way, the balance between work and care, between earning and creating, between ambition and integrity. When she returned to the wheel and listened again to the clay, she found what she had lost. Not wealth, not fame, but the quiet satisfaction of work done well, of attention given fully, of craft honored as a form of devotion. When we chase quantity at the expense of quality, we lose both in the end. But when we return to care, to attention, to the patient work of doing one thing well, we find that the world responds, the clay remembers, and so do the people who hold what we have made. Let us rest now. Let us breathe. Feel your body. Feel how heavy your arms have become, how your legs have settled into the bed like stones settling into sand, how your breath has become so slow, so gentle, that you can barely feel it moving. This is good. This is your body finding its way to rest. You do not need to follow these stories anymore. If your mind is drifting, let it drift. If your eyes are heavy, let them stay closed. If sleep is close, let it come. These words will be here. These stories will wait. There is no ending you need to reach tonight. Simply rest. Simply breathe. Simply be. And if you are still with me, still listening, still gently awake, let us walk together a little further into the night. There is one more story I would like to share before we rest. A story about a different kind of taking. Not the taking of honey from the forest, or dignity from a family, or trust from a community, or quality from a craft. This story is about the taking of silence from a place that needed it. In a valley between two mountains, there was a monastery. It was very old. The stone walls had been built by monks who had died before anyone in the surrounding villages had been born. The courtyard was paved with flat stones, worn smooth by centuries of walking feet, feet that had moved slowly, deliberately, in the practice of walking meditation. The garden held trees planted by hands that had long since returned to the earth. The monastery was known for one thing above all else: its silence, not the absence of sound. The valley was full of sound. Birds calling from the mountain slopes, wind moving through the pines, water running over stones in the narrow stream that passed through the garden, the distant bleating of goats from the village below. These sounds were part of the silence. They lived within it, like fish in a clear pool, visible but not disturbing the clarity of the water. The silence of the monastery was something else. It was cultivated, tended, protected. The monks who lived there spoke only when necessary, and when they spoke softly and briefly, as if each word were a stone placed carefully in a garden, chosen for its shape and position, never tossed carelessly. This silence had a quality. Visitors felt it the moment they passed through the gate. A settling, a release. As if the air itself were different here, thicker somehow, more substantial, capable of holding you the way water holds a leaf. People came from great distances to sit in this silence, not to learn anything, not to receive teachings or attend ceremonies, simply to sit, simply to be held by the quiet. The abbot of the monastery was an old nun named Ananda. She had lived there for 40 years, arriving as a young woman fleeing a grief she never spoke about, and staying because the silence had done what nothing else could. It had held her grief without trying to fix it. It had given her space to feel what she needed to feel, to think what she needed to think, to slowly, over years and decades, find her way back to herself. Ananda protected the silence the way a gardener protects a rare flower, not with walls or rules, though there were rules, but with attention, with awareness, with the understanding that silence is not the default state of a place, but a condition that must be actively maintained, like a fire that must be fed or a garden that must be weeded. She had a saying that the monks repeated to each other and to visitors. Silence is not empty. Silence is full. It is full of everything you need to hear. Into this monastery came a man named Vikash. He was a merchant, successful, energetic, accustomed to the noise of markets and the bustle of trade routes. He had come to the monastery not because he sought silence, but because his doctor had told him to rest. His heart was racing, his sleep was broken, his hands shook when he held a cup of tea. His body was telling him something, and his doctor had translated the message simply: You are consuming yourself. Go somewhere quiet. Stop talking. Stop planning. Stop. Vikash did not want to stop. Stopping felt like dying to a man who had built his life on motion. But the shaking hands frightened him, and the racing heart frightened him more, and so he came to the monastery, carrying a small bag and a large reluctance. He was given a small room with a sleeping mat, a window that looked out onto the garden, and nothing else. No desk, no chair, no shelf of books, just the mat, the window, and the silence. He lasted approximately 1 hour before the silence began to unravel him. It started with restlessness. He paced the small room. He looked out the window. He paced again. He sat on the mat, stood up, sat down, stood up. His mind, accustomed to the constant stimulation of trade and negotiation and the endless calculation of profit and loss, found nothing to grip in the empty room and began to spin like a wheel with no clay on it, turning and producing nothing. Then came the need to talk. He found a young monk sweeping the courtyard and struck up a conversation. The monk listened politely, nodded, and continued sweeping. Vikash followed him, talking about his journey, the road conditions, the weather, his business, his health, anything to fill the silence that pressed against him like something physical. The monk said nothing, not from rudeness, from practice. He was observing the noble silence, speaking only during designated hours and only when necessary. But Vikash did not know this, and the monk's quiet felt like rejection. He found another monk in the garden and tried again. The same gentle silence, the same polite nod, the same return to work. Vikash began to feel something he had not felt in years, something he had spent his entire adult life arranging his world to avoid. He began to feel himself, without the noise of business, without the constant chatter of negotiation and planning, without the reassuring soundtrack of a busy, important life. Vikash was left with only Vikash. And Vikash, it turned out, was not comfortable company. The thoughts that arose in the silence were not the thoughts he was used to. They were not about shipments and prices and margins. They were about his daughter, whom he had not visited in 3 months. About his wife, who had stopped asking him when he would be home because the answer was always the same and always a lie. About the friend he had cheated in a business deal 6 years ago, a man named Sunil, who had trusted him and whom he had betrayed for a profit so small he could not even remember the amount. These thoughts arrived like guests at a door he had kept locked for years. They knocked politely at first, then more insistently, and in the silence of the monastery, there was nothing to drown them out. No market noise, no negotiations, no plans to make and orders to fill, just the thoughts and the silence and the window looking out on the garden where the trees stood patient and still. Vikash did what many people do when confronted with uncomfortable silence. He tried to fill it. He began to talk to himself, muttering as he walked the corridors, humming as he sat in the garden, tapping his fingers on the stone walls, clearing his throat again and again, a small, unnecessary sound that broke the quiet like a pebble dropped in a still pond, sending ripples outward through the careful peace of the monastery. The other monks noticed. They said nothing, as was their way, but they noticed. And then Vikash found something in his bag that he had forgotten he had packed. A small bell, a merchant's bell, the kind used to attract customers in the market, bright and sharp and utterly at odds with the deep quiet of the monastery. He had packed it out of habit. It was always in his bag. It was part of his identity, the sound that announced him, that said, "I am here, I have things to sell, pay attention to me." He did not ring it. Not at first. He held it in his hand and felt its weight and looked at it. Such a small thing, such a bright, sharp sound locked inside such a small shell of brass. He set it on the windowsill of his room, where the afternoon light caught it and made it glow. And he looked at it the way Bharat had looked at the honey, the way Arvind had looked at the dowry gold, the way Kavi had looked at the desperate faces on the riverbank. He looked at it, and he thought about what it could do to the silence. He did not ring it that day, or the next, but he kept it on the windowsill, and each time he passed it, his fingers twitched, the silence pressed against him, and the bell sat there, small and bright, promising relief. On the third day, Vikash could not sleep. The silence at night was the worst. During the day, there were at least the sounds of the valley, the birds, the wind, the water. But at night, the silence deepened into something vast and bottomless, a well with no bottom, a sky with no stars. He lay on his mat and stared at the ceiling and felt the thoughts come, one after another, relentless as waves. His daughter's face. She had been 7 the last time he had really looked at her, really seen her, not glanced at her on his way out the door, not waved from the cart as he left for another trip, but sat with her, held her hand, listened to her talk about the things 7-year-old girls talk about. Butterflies, the color of the sky before rain, whether fish dream. She was 10 now. He did not know what 10-year-old girls talked about. He had not been there to find out. This thought arrived in the silence and would not leave. It sat beside him on the mat like a patient animal, warm and heavy and impossible to ignore. He reached for the bell. He rang it once, just once. A bright, sharp note that cut through the silence of the monastery like a blade through silk. It echoed off the stone walls of his room, bounced down the corridor, rippled out into the courtyard where the worn stones absorbed it and gave it back, diminished, but still audible, still present, still wrong. The sound lasted only a moment. Then the silence closed over it, the way water closes over a stone. But something had changed. The silence was different now. It had a wound in it, a small one, barely noticeable, like a scratch on a polished surface. But it was there. And Vikash felt better. For exactly the length of time it took the sound to die, he felt better. The thought about his daughter retreated. The silence loosened its grip. He could breathe again. He set the bell down. He slept. The next morning, he rang it again. Twice this time. Once when the thought about Sunil came, the cheated friend, the broken trust. And once when the silence simply became too much, too wide, too full of the things he did not want to feel. Each time, the bright sound pushed the silence back. Each time, the relief lasted a few seconds less than the time before. Each time, the silence returned a little different, a little less whole. Over the following days, Vikash rang the bell more and more frequently. He carried it with him, to the garden, to the dining hall, to the meditation room where the monks sat in rows, their eyes closed, their breathing synchronized into a collective rhythm, as slow and steady as the turning of the earth. He would sit among them and feel the silence build, feel it gather around him like warm water, feel it begin to soften the hard edges of his thoughts. And then, just as the softening reached something tender, something true, something he did not want to feel, he would reach into his robe and ring the bell. The monks flinched. They did not open their eyes. They did not speak. But they flinched each time, a tiny involuntary contraction of the shoulders, a tightening of the jaw, a ripple of disturbance passing through the room like wind through tall grass. And then they would settle again, finding their way back to the silence, repairing what had been torn. But the repairs took longer each time, because silence, like trust, like a colony of bees, like the quality of a pot, is not infinitely resilient. It can be damaged. It can be worn down. It can be broken so many times that the breaks begin to overlap, and the whole fabric of the thing begins to thin, to fray, to lose the density and depth that made it valuable. The young monk who swept the courtyard began to lose his concentration. He had been practicing silent meditation for 2 years, building his ability to sit with stillness the way a potter builds a vessel, layer by patient layer. The bell shattered his concentration like a stone thrown through a window. Each time he rebuilt it, each time it was a little harder, each time something was lost that could not be fully recovered. An elderly monk named Tenzin, who had lived in the monastery for 30 years and who had reached a depth of practice that allowed him to sit for hours in a state of perfect, luminous awareness, began to develop a twitch in his left eye. He had never had this before. It appeared the day Vikash started ringing the bell in the meditation hall, and it did not go away. The visitors who came for the silence began to notice its diminishment. A woman who had traveled 3 days on foot to sit in the famous quiet of the monastery arrived, passed through the gate, and felt something different. The settling that usually came was slower, thinner. The air did not hold her the way it once had. She sat in the garden and waited for the silence to deepen, and it did deepen eventually, but not to the level she remembered from her last visit. Something had been taken from it, something essential. She left a day earlier than she had planned, and when her friends asked about the monastery, she said only, "It was not the same." Ananda observed all of this. She observed it the way she observed everything, with patience and attention, and a clarity that came from 40 years of sitting with silence and learning its nature. She did not confront Vikash immediately. She watched. She waited. She let the situation develop until she understood it fully, not just what Vikash was doing, but why. Not just the bell, but the hand that rang it. Not just the sound, but the fear that needed the sound. On the 7th day of Vikash's stay, she found him in the garden at dusk. He was sitting on the stone bench beneath the oldest tree, the bell in his hand, turning it over and over between his fingers. His face was drawn. He looked worse than when he had arrived. The shaking in his hands was not better. The shadows under his eyes were deeper. Whatever he had been seeking from the bell, it was not working. Ananda sat beside him on the bench. The evening air was cool. The last birds were settling into the trees for the night, their calls becoming softer, less frequent, until they faded entirely, and the valley held only the sound of the stream and the wind and the great, patient quiet that came with the darkness. They sat together without speaking for a long time. Vikash turned the bell in his hands. Ananda folded her hands in her lap. The sky deepened from blue to gray to the dark purple that comes just before the stars appear. "You are afraid of the quiet," she said at last. Not a question. Vikash's fingers stilled on the bell. He did not look at her. "The quiet is too loud," he said. Ananda considered this. "What do you hear in it?" "Things I do not want to hear." "What things?" He was silent for a long time. The first stars appeared, small and bright, like drops of water on dark cloth. "My daughter," he said finally. "My wife, a friend I wronged, all the years I spent making money instead of making a life." Ananda nodded slowly. "And the bell?" "The bell makes them stop, for a moment. It pushes them away. Does it? Vikash looked at her. In the dim light, her face was calm, not judging, not lecturing, simply present, simply asking. No, he admitted. They come back. They always come back. And each time they are louder. Ananda reached out her hand, not demanding, open, waiting. Vikash looked at the bell. He looked at her open palm. He looked at the sky, where more stars were appearing, slowly, like thoughts arising in a quiet mind. He placed the bell in her hand. She closed her fingers around it. The brass was warm from his touch. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, feeling the sound contained within it, the sharp, bright sound that had been cutting through her monastery's silence for a week. This bell is not the problem, she said, and the silence is not the enemy. Then what is? You're running. You have been running from yourself for so long that you have forgotten what you are running from. And when the silence shows you, you reach for the bell. But the bell does not erase what the silence reveals. It only delays the seeing, and the delay has a cost. What cost? Ananda gestured toward the monastery, the dim shapes of the buildings, the meditation hall, the courtyard, the garden where they sat. Every time you ring this bell, you take something from this place, not something you can see, not something you can weigh or measure, but something real. The silence here was built by generations of practice. It was cultivated, tended. It is not just the absence of noise. It is a living thing, like a garden, like a hive of bees. Vikash flinched at something in her words, though he could not have known about Bharat and the honey. Every sharp sound driven into that silence damages it, Ananda continued. Not permanently, if the damage is small and infrequent. Silence heals, as all living things heal, but repeated damage, constant tearing, that is different. That wears the fabric thin, and when the silence is thin, the monks cannot practice as deeply. The visitors cannot find what they came for. The healing that this place offers, the holding, the space, the capacity to sit with whatever arises, all of that diminishes. She paused. The stream murmured in the darkness. The stars continued their slow appearing. You have been taking something that does not belong to you, Vikash. Not with malice, not with awareness, but the taking is real. You have been consuming the silence of this place to avoid hearing the silence in yourself. Vikash sat with this. The bench was cold beneath him. The air was growing cooler as the last warmth of the day drained from the stones. He could feel the absence of the bell in his hand, a lightness where the weight had been, an emptiness where the smooth brass had rested against his palm. What am I supposed to do? He asked. If I cannot ring the bell, and I cannot bear the silence, what am I supposed to do? Ananda smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible in the darkness, but it changed the shape of the air around her. You sit with it, she said. You sit with the silence, and when the thoughts come, you let them come. And when they hurt, you let them hurt. And when you want to reach for the bell, you notice the wanting, and you breathe, and you let the wanting pass. And if it doesn't pass, it passes. Everything passes. This is the nature of all things. The thought arises, it remains, it fades. The pain arises, it remains, it fades. The wanting arises, it remains, it fades. You do not need to do anything about any of it. You only need to be present while it happens. That sounds like torture, Vikash said. It sounds like torture to a man who has been running. To a man who has stopped running, it sounds like freedom. Let us pause here together. Feel your breath, how slow it has become, how natural. You are not controlling it. You are not counting it. It moves on its own, in its own rhythm, like the stream through the monastery garden, in and out, rise and fall, a rhythm older than thought, older than language, older than all the stories ever told. You are safe. You are held. The silence around you tonight is not empty. It is full, full of rest, full of peace, full of everything you need. Let your body be heavy now. Let your mind be quiet. And if sleep is near, let it come. You do not need to finish this story tonight. The story will wait. Everything waits for you tonight. And if you are still here, still listening, still floating on the gentle current of these words, let us return one more time to the monastery in the valley between two mountains. Vikash stayed. He stayed not because he wanted to, but because he could not bring himself to leave. Something in Ananda's words had hooked him, not in the sharp way of a fishhook, but in the gentle way of a hand on a sleeve, a quiet insistence, a pull he could not explain and did not try to resist. Without the bell, the silence was enormous. It filled his room. It pressed against his skin. It lay beside him on the sleeping mat like another body, warm and breathing and impossibly close. And the thoughts came. They came at night, mostly, when there was nothing between him and himself. The memory of Sunil's face when he realized what Vikash had done. The business deal that had seemed so clever, so profitable, so victimless, until Vikash saw the look in his friend's eyes and understood that he had stolen something that could not be measured in coins. Trust. Years of trust. A friendship that had begun when they were boys, and that Vikash had traded for an amount of money so small he could not remember it. He lay on his mat and let the memory come. He did not reach for the bell. He did not hum or tap or clear his throat. He lay still, and he let the memory fill him like water filling a vessel. And when it reached the top, when it threatened to overflow, he breathed, just breathed, and the water level dropped slightly, and he breathed again, and it dropped a little more. This did not happen in one night. It took many nights, many sittings in the meditation hall where the silence was slowly healing, its depth returning as the days without the bell accumulated. Many walks in the garden where the trees stood patient, and the stream ran clear, and the stones beneath his feet were worn smooth by the footsteps of monks who had faced their own silences and survived. The thought about his daughter was the hardest. It came not as a single memory, but as an absence, a gap in his life shaped like a child. All the mornings he had left before she woke, all the evenings he had returned after she slept, all the conversations he had not had, the questions he had not answered, the small daily moments of a growing life that he had exchanged, one by one, for the accumulation of wealth that now seemed as insubstantial as the sound of a bell fading into silence. He sat with this absence. He breathed through it. He wept, sometimes, alone in his room, his face pressed against the sleeping mat, his body shaking with the force of a grief he had not allowed himself to feel for years. The silence held him. It did not fix him. It did not comfort him with words or explanations. It simply held him, the way the earth holds a falling leaf, receiving it without judgment, without condition, simply because that is what the earth does. And slowly, something changed. Not the facts of his life. His daughter was still 10. His wife was still waiting. Sunil was still betrayed. The years of absence and neglect and greed could not be unfelt, unlived, undone. The past was the past, solid as stone, immovable as the mountains that cradled the valley. What changed was Vikash's relationship to the past. He stopped running from it. He stopped trying to drown it with sound. He stopped treating his memories as enemies to be defeated and began to see them as teachers. Painful teachers, teachers who spoke in the language of regret and longing and loss, but teachers nonetheless. And in the silence, he heard something else, something underneath the pain and the regret, something that had been there all along, waiting for the noise to stop so it could be heard. He heard the possibility of change, not the erasure of the past, not the fixing of what was broken, but the possibility of doing differently, of going home and sitting with his daughter and asking her what she was thinking about, of looking at his wife and really seeing her, not as part of the furniture of his life, but as a person, whole and separate, with her own thoughts and her own silences and her own unfelt feelings waiting to be felt, of finding Sunil and saying the only thing that could be said. Not, "I am sorry," though he was sorry, but "I see what I did. I see the cost, and I will not pretend otherwise." These possibilities did not arrive with fanfare. They arrived quietly, the way dawn arrives, not all at once, but gradually, the darkness thinning degree by degree, until the light is simply there, has been there for some time, and you realize you have been seeing by it without noticing when it began. On the morning of his last day at the monastery, Vikash went to find Ananda. She was in the garden, pruning the old rose bushes along the wall. Her hands moved with the same deliberate care that characterized everything she did. Each cut was considered. Each branch was examined before the blade touched it. She removed only what was dead or dying, leaving the living wood to find its own shape. "I am leaving today," he said. "Yes," she said, not looking up from her work. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For taking the bell." Ananda set down her pruning knife and looked at him. Her eyes were dark and clear, like pools of still water. "I did not take the bell. You gave it to me." "Yes," he said. "I suppose I did." "That is the difference," she said, "between taking and giving, between grasping and releasing. No one can take greed from you, Vikash. Not a teacher, not a monastery, not even the silence. You have to set it down yourself. You have to open your hand and let it go." She reached into her robe and brought out the bell. It looked smaller than he remembered, less significant. A simple merchant's bell, brass, slightly dented from years of use. A tool, nothing more. She held it out to him. He looked at it for a long time. He felt the familiar pull, the wanting, the impulse to close his fingers around it and feel its weight and know that he had something, held something, possessed something that could fill the silence when the silence became too much. He shook his head. "Keep it," he said, "or throw it in the stream. I do not need it anymore." Ananda smiled, not the small, barely visible smile of their first conversation. A real smile, warm and open, the kind of smile that transformed her face from stern to beautiful, the way sunlight transforms a landscape from flat and gray to vivid and alive. "No," she said gently. "Take it with you, not to ring, but to remember. Let it remind you of what happens when we fill silence with noise because we are afraid of what the silence will show us. Let it remind you that the things we reach for to avoid our pain often cause more pain, not just to ourselves, but to everyone around us." She placed the bell in his hand. "And Vikash, when you are home, when the world is loud and the impulse to take, to grasp, to fill every empty space with sound and activity and acquisition, when that impulse comes, and it will come, hold the bell. Feel its weight. Remember this place, and then set it down. Open your hand Let the silence in. He closed his fingers around the bell one last time. It was cool now, not warm. It had been in her robe, away from his body heat, and the coolness of it felt like something new, something beginning. He walked out of the monastery gate into the morning. The valley stretched before him, green and gold in the early light. The mountains rose on either side, their peaks still touched with the last of the night's shadow. The path wound down through pine trees toward the village, and beyond the village, the road, and beyond the road, his life, his daughter, his wife, the friend he had wronged, all of it waiting, as it had always been waiting, for him to stop running and turn around and face it. He walked. The bell was in his bag, silent. The path was beneath his feet. The mountains held the valley, and the valley held the path, and the path held him, and the morning air was cool against his face, and the birds were singing, and somewhere behind him, in the monastery he was leaving, the silence was deepening again, healing, filling back in like water finding its level, and the monks were sitting in their rows with their eyes closed, and their breathing slow and steady. And old Tenzin's eye had stopped twitching, and the young monk was sweeping the courtyard with a concentration that was deeper than it had ever been. Deeper because it had been broken and rebuilt, and each rebuilding had taught him something about the nature of attention, the fragility of it, the preciousness of it, the need to protect it, not just from the world, but from one's own restless desire to fill every empty space with something, anything, rather than sit with the emptiness and discover what it holds. This story shows us how greed extends beyond material things. Vikash discovered that his compulsion to fill silence with noise was the same impulse that had driven him to fill his life with business at the expense of relationships. Buddhism teaches that grasping, called upadana in the Pali language, is not limited to physical possessions. We grasp at sounds, at distractions, at anything that shields us from the discomfort of being present with ourselves. When Vikash rang his bell in the monastery, he was taking something real, the communal silence that others had spent years cultivating. His personal discomfort led him to damage a shared resource, just as Bharat's desire for honey destroyed a shared ecosystem. When we learn to sit with silence, to face what arises without reaching for distraction, we discover that the emptiness we feared is not empty at all. It is full of everything we have been avoiding, and those avoided things, the memories, the regrets, the unexamined truths of our lives are not enemies. They are the beginning of change. Let us rest here for a while, a long while. Feel your body now. Feel how far you have come since we began. Your breath is slow. Your limbs are heavy. The darkness around you is soft and warm, like a blanket woven from the night itself. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let the small muscles around your eyes release their holding. Feel your forehead smooth. Feel your scalp relax. Feel your whole face soften, as if the features were melting gently into a calm, expressionless peace. Your hands are resting. Your fingers are still. Your wrists, your forearms, your elbows, your upper arms, all heavy, all warm, all releasing into the surface that holds you. There is nothing you need to do. There is nothing you need to think about. There is nothing you need to remember or plan or solve. The stories are resting now, and you can rest with them. Breathe in, slowly. Feel the air fill you, gentle and cool. Breathe out, slowly. Feel the warmth of your breath against your lips, again and again. And if sleep has found you, let it take you. Let it carry you into the deep, quiet place where stories dissolve into dreams and dreams dissolve into the pure, restful silence that your body needs and your mind has been searching for. Sleep now, if you can, and if you are still with me, still floating in that gentle space between waking and sleep, that soft, luminous space where everything is possible and nothing is required, then let us continue, slowly, gently. One more story, told in the quietest voice for the quietest hour of the night. This last story is about turmeric, about the golden spice that grows in the warm, wet earth and colors everything it touches. In a fertile lowland where the monsoon rains came heavy and dependable, there lived a farmer named Amara. She was a woman of middle years, strong-backed and brown-skinned, with hands permanently stained yellow from the turmeric she cultivated. The stain would not wash out. It lived in the creases of her palms, under her nails, in the fine lines of her knuckles. She did not mind. The yellow was part of her, the way the smell of smoke was part of a blacksmith, the way the calluses on a boatman's hands were part of his grip. Amara had inherited her turmeric fields from her mother, who had inherited them from her mother before her. 3 generations of women had tended this particular stretch of earth, learning its moods and preferences, understanding which sections drained well and which held water too long, knowing where the soil was richest and where it thinned to sandy clay that produced rhizomes without flavor. The turmeric they grew was exceptional. Not the largest rhizomes, not the most abundant harvest, but the deepest color, the most complex flavor, a warmth that began on the tongue and spread through the chest like a small sun settling behind the ribs. Healers came from distant towns to buy Amara's turmeric specifically, claiming it was more potent in medicines. Cooks said it transformed ordinary dishes into something remarkable. Temple priests preferred it for their ceremonies, saying the color it produced was closer to true gold than any other turmeric they had found. The secret, if it was a secret, was simple. Amara rotated her fields. Each year she planted turmeric in only half her land. The other half she left fallow or planted with legumes that returned nitrogen to the soil, or simply let the wild grasses grow and die and decompose back into the earth. This was the way her grandmother had done it, and her mother after that. The land needed rest. It needed time to recover what the turmeric took from it. It needed seasons of giving nothing in order to have something to give. The earth is not a pot you can empty and fill at will, her mother had told her. The earth is a living thing. It breathes. It sleeps. It needs time between harvests, the way you need time between breaths. Amara understood this. She had grown up watching her mother walk the fallow fields, not with the purposeful stride of someone heading somewhere, but with the slow, attentive pace of someone listening. Her mother would crouch and press her hand into the soil, feeling its texture, its moisture, its warmth. She would crumble a clod between her fingers and smell it, the way a tea master smells a new leaf, reading the subtle information contained in the scent. "This field is ready," she would say after a season of rest. Or, "This one needs another year. The worms have not returned yet." And she was always right. The fields she declared ready produced magnificent turmeric. The fields she said needed more rest were left alone, and the following year, they too were ready, and they too produced magnificently. Amara followed this practice faithfully for many years. Her harvests were modest but consistent. Her turmeric was sought after. She earned enough to maintain her home, to feed her family, to set aside a small amount for the lean seasons when the rains failed or the prices dropped. She was not wealthy, but she was sustained, and the land was sustained, and the cycle continued, season after season, breath after breath, rest after rest. Then came the year of the new road. It was the same road that had transformed Mira's town, the great trading route connecting the coast to the inland markets. When it reached Amara's region, everything changed. Merchants who had never ventured this far suddenly appeared, their carts empty and their purses full. They had heard about the turmeric, the exceptional turmeric, the turmeric with the deepest color and the warmest flavor. They wanted all of it. They would pay handsomely. Amara sold her entire harvest that year for 3 times the usual price. The merchant, a round-faced man named Gopal, the same Gopal who would later carry broken pottery back to Mira's courtyard, smiled broadly as he loaded the sacks onto his cart. "Next year," he said, "I will buy twice as much. Can you grow twice as much?" Amara looked at her fields. Half were planted with turmeric, lush and green, the broad leaves catching the monsoon rain. The other half lay fallow, covered in wild grass and clover, quietly rebuilding themselves for the next planting. "I can plant the fallow fields," she said slowly. "Excellent. I will return at harvest time. Twice the amount, twice the payment." He shook her hand with both of his smile so wide it seemed to reach his ears. After he left, Amara walked to the fallow fields. She crouched and pressed her hand into the soil. It was dark and moist and smelled of rain and earth and the faint sweetness of decomposing clover. It was not quite ready. It needed perhaps one more season of rest. The worms were returning but had not fully populated the deeper layers. The microbial life that her mother had described as the soil breathing was present, but not yet at its fullest expression. Her mother's voice came to her, as these voices do in these stories, clear and patient. "This one needs another year." Amara stood up. She looked at the fallow fields. She thought about the merchant's offer. Twice the amount, twice the payment, enough to repair the roof that leaked every monsoon, enough to buy the new grinding stone she needed, enough to send her son to the school in the district town, the one with the teacher who was said to be very good. She thought about the roof. She thought about the grinding stone. She thought about her son. She planted both fields. The turmeric grew. It grew in the rested fields with the vigor and depth of color she expected. The rhizomes fat and fragrant. Their flesh the deep orange gold that healers and cooks prized. It grew in the insufficiently rested fields too, but differently. The plants were slightly shorter. The leaves were a shade lighter. The rhizomes, when she dug a test plant to check, were adequate. Good, even, but not exceptional. The color was a tone paler. The flavor lacked the final note of warmth, that spreading sensation behind the ribs. It was good turmeric. It was not Amara's turmeric. She harvested everything. She mixed the exceptional turmeric with the adequate turmeric, blending them together in the drying shed until the difference was hidden, not invisible to a trained eye, not undetectable to a sensitive palate, but hidden enough that a merchant loading sacks onto a cart would not notice. Gopal came. He paid. He was pleased. He took twice as much turmeric as the previous year and headed south to the coastal markets. Amara repaired her roof. She bought the grinding stone. She sent her son to the school. She felt the satisfaction of these accomplishments and told herself that the compromise had been worth it. One season of pushing the land a little harder than it wanted to be pushed. One season of taking a little more than the earth was ready to give. The fields would recover. She would let them rest properly next year. But next year, Gopal came back wanting 3 times the original amount. And he brought another merchant with him, a woman from the coast who wanted Amara to supply turmeric for a chain of apothecaries. The numbers they discussed were larger than anything Amara had imagined, enough to buy land, enough to build a new house, enough to secure her son's education for years. She planted everything, every field. No fallow season, no rest, no rotation. The turmeric grew. It grew because turmeric is a resilient plant, and the soil was not yet depleted. Not yet, though it was beginning to thin in ways that were invisible on the surface. The harvest was large. The quality was acceptable, not exceptional, not even good by the standards Amara's mother would have applied, but acceptable, sellable, adequate for merchants who were buying in volume and cared more about quantity than the subtle distinction between turmeric that was truly extraordinary and turmeric that was merely fine. Amara sold it all. She built the new house. She bought more land, intending to plant even more turmeric the following year. She hired laborers to help with the expanded operation. She was becoming something she had never imagined being. Not just a farmer, a supplier, a business. The third year without fallow, the soil began to speak, not in words. Soil does not speak in words. It speaks in texture and color and smell and in the things that grow from it and the things that do not. The turmeric that emerged that third year was noticeably different. The plants were shorter still. The leaves yellowed at the edges before the season was half over. The rhizomes, when harvested, were smaller, lighter, with a color that had shifted from deep orange gold to a pale, washed-out yellow, like the memory of gold rather than gold itself. Amara stood in the drying shed, looking at the spread of harvested rhizomes, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She picked one up and broke it open. The flesh inside was pale. She held it to her nose. The scent was thin. She touched it to her tongue. The flavor was there, but distantly, like hearing a song from very far away, recognizing the melody but unable to feel its power. She thought of her mother, crouching in the field, pressing her hand to the earth, smelling the soil. This one needs another year. How many years did the soil need now? Not one, not two. The damage of 3 consecutive harvests without rest had accumulated. The microorganisms that broke down organic matter and made nutrients available to the roots had diminished. The worm population had collapsed. The soil structure itself had changed, becoming denser, more compacted, less able to hold moisture and air in the delicate balance that turmeric requires. Gopal came for his order. He opened the first sack, and his face changed. He picked up a rhizome, broke it open, held it to the light. He looked at Amara. "This is not the same," he said. "It has been a difficult season," she said. The excuse felt thin in her mouth, like the turmeric on her tongue. "My customers in the coast pay a premium because I told them this was the finest turmeric in the region. This is not the finest turmeric in the region. This is..." He searched for the word. "This is ordinary." Ordinary. The word landed on Amara like a stone. Her mother's turmeric had never been called ordinary. Her grandmother's turmeric had never been called ordinary. For 3 generations, this land had produced something extraordinary, and in 3 years, Amara had reduced it to ordinary. She lowered her price. Gopal bought the turmeric, but at the rate he would have paid any farmer, not the premium he had paid for Amara's exceptional crop. He did not mention next year's order. He did not shake her hand with both of his. He loaded his cart and left, and the dust from his wheels settled on the road like the closing of a door. That evening, Amara walked her fields alone. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the earth. She crouched in the center of the largest field, the one her grandmother had cleared, the one that had produced the finest turmeric for as long as anyone could remember. She pressed her hand into the soil. It was different. She could feel the difference with her palm, the way a healer can feel the difference between healthy skin and fevered skin. The earth was harder, drier, even though the rains had been adequate. It crumbled not into the rich, loose aggregates she remembered, but into fine dust that sifted through her fingers and blew away in the evening breeze. She lifted a handful to her nose. The sweet, alive smell that had always risen from this soil, that smell of biological activity, of worms and fungi and the countless invisible organisms that make earth fertile, was faint, almost absent. She let the dust fall from her hand. She knelt there in the field as the sun went down and the shadows merged into a general darkness and the first stars appeared above the hills. She knelt and she felt the earth beneath her knees, tired earth, exhausted earth, earth that had given and given and given because she had asked and asked and asked, and now had very little left to give. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not to anyone, to the field, to the soil, to the worms that had left, and the microbes that had died, and the delicate, invisible web of life that had made this particular patch of earth capable of producing something extraordinary. She whispered it to her mother, whose voice had tried to warn her. She whispered it to her grandmother, whose careful practice she had abandoned. She whispered it to the turmeric itself, which had done its best to grow in impoverished soil and had produced what it could and could not be blamed for the fact that what it could produce was no longer enough. The earth did not answer. The earth does not answer in the moment you want it to. It answers over seasons, over years, in the slow language of growth and recovery and the patient return of what was lost. But Amara knew the answer already. She knew it in her hands, in her knees pressed against the hard soil, in the faint, diminished smell of a field that had been asked to give too much. The answer was time. The fields needed time. Not one season of rest, not two, perhaps 5, perhaps more. Years during which the turmeric would not grow here, during which the legumes and the wild grasses and the worms and the fungi would slowly, slowly rebuild what she had spent. Years during which she would have nothing to sell, nothing to trade, no income from the land that had always provided. The new house she had built would need to be maintained. Her son's school fees would continue. The laborers she had hired would need to be released. The merchants would find other suppliers, other farms, other turmeric. And by the time her fields recovered, if they recovered, the market would have moved on. The premium she once commanded would be a memory. She would be starting over, not from scratch, because the land was still hers and her knowledge was still intact, but from a diminished place, a place of consequence, a place shaped by the choices she had made. She got to her feet slowly. Her knees ached from kneeling on the hard ground. She brushed the dust from her sari and walked home in the dark, navigating by the faint starlight and the memory of a path she had walked 10,000 times. The following morning, she began the work of recovery. She released her laborers, paying them fairly for the remaining season. She contacted Gopal and told him she would have no turmeric next year, possibly not the year after. He received this news without surprise. He had seen the quality of the last harvest. He had already begun sourcing from other farms. She planted the entire area in clover and mustard, crops that would fix nitrogen in the soil and, when turned under, add organic matter. She carried compost from the village's communal pile, spreading it by hand across the tired fields, feeding the earth the way you feed a sick person, carefully, in small amounts, with attention to what is needed rather than what is convenient. She walked the fields each day, as her mother had done. She pressed her hand into the soil and felt for changes. At first, there were none. The earth remained hard and dry and lifeless beneath her palm. But after the first rains, after the clover sprouted and the mustard put out its yellow flowers, and the roots of these simple plants began their quiet work of breaking up the compacted soil and drawing nutrients from deep below, she felt the first stirring. Not a dramatic change, not a transformation, just a slight softening, a give in the earth that had not been there before, a suggestion, a whisper, the soil beginning tentatively to breathe again. She continued, season after season, planting cover crops, adding compost, letting the wild grasses grow and die and return to the earth, letting the worms come back, slowly, tentatively, the way animals return to a place where they were once abundant and then driven away. Her son came home from school during the breaks and helped. He was a quiet boy, studious, with his mother's strong back and his grandmother's patient hands. He did not ask why the turmeric fields were empty. He had heard the stories. He understood, in the way that children understand the mistakes of their parents, with a mixture of compassion and the quiet determination to do differently. In the second year of recovery, Amara found a worm. It was a small thing, thin and pink and blind, curling in the freshly turned earth of the field her grandmother had cleared. She held it in her palm and watched it move, its body contracting and extending, searching for the dark, moist soil it needed. She placed it back in the earth gently, covering it with a handful of compost. She knelt there for a moment, her yellow-stained hands resting on the soil, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, not relief, something quieter than either. Recognition. The recognition that the earth was beginning to heal, that the damage she had done was not permanent, that patience and care and the willingness to give instead of take could, over time, restore what greed had depleted. It would take years. She knew that. The turmeric she would eventually grow in these restored fields might never reach the quality her grandmother had achieved. Some damage cannot be fully undone. Some qualities, once lost, can only be approximated, approached, remembered. But the earth was alive again. The worms were returning. The soil was softening. The breath of the field, that sweet, complex smell of biological activity, was returning faintly, like a song heard from a great distance, growing closer. This story shows us how greed depletes the sources we depend on. Amara discovered that the exceptional quality of her turmeric was not something she created. It was something the earth created, given sufficient rest and care. Buddhism teaches about the middle way, the path between the extremes of self-denial and self-indulgence. Amara's mother understood this path. She took from the earth, but she also gave back. She harvested, but she also rested. She produced, but she also allowed recovery. When Amara abandoned this balance, chasing the larger profits the new road made possible, she did not simply reduce the quality of her crop. She damaged the capacity of the soil to produce at all. When we push any system beyond its capacity to recover, whether that system is a field, a body, a relationship, or a community, we do not gain more. We set in motion a process of depletion that eventually leaves us with less than we had before we started taking. Let us rest here now. Feel your body. Feel how deeply it has settled. Your breath moves so slowly now, so gently, that you can barely distinguish the inhale from the exhale. They have become one continuous movement, a circle of air, a wheel turning so slowly that it seems almost still. Your feet are warm. Feel the warmth in your toes, in the arches of your feet, in your ankles. Let that warmth spread upward. into your calves, into your knees, into your thighs. A slow, spreading warmth like sunlight moving across a field at dawn, touching each blade of grass, each flower, each leaf, one by one, patiently, without hurry. Let the warmth reach your hips, your lower back. Feel the muscles there soften and release. Feel the bed rise up to meet you as you sink a little deeper, a little further into rest. Your stomach is soft, your chest is open. Your breath moves through you like a gentle wind through an open window, coming and going, carrying nothing, asking nothing, simply moving because that is what breath does. You are safe, you are held, you are resting. We have traveled far tonight. We have met Bharat, who took all the honey and watched the forest fall silent. We met Arvind, who priced his daughter so high that she became worthless and his son became alone. We sat with Kavi on his boat, watching his money box sink into the brown water as he rowed, finally, toward the people he had exploited for years. We watched Mira return to her wheel, close her eyes, and listen again to the clay. We sat with Vikash in the silence of the monastery as he learned to face the thoughts he had been running from. And we knelt with Amara in her depleted field, holding a single worm in her palm, feeling the first stirring of recovery in the soil she had exhausted. Each of these stories is different. Different people, different places, different forms of greed. But they are all the same story, told in different languages. They are all the story of what happens when we forget that we live in a web, that everything is connected, that the bee depends on the flower and the flower depends on the bee, that the silence depends on the monks and the monks depend on the silence, that the potter depends on the clay and the clay depends on the potter, that the earth depends on the farmer and the farmer depends on the earth. When we take too much, we do not simply reduce what is available. We damage the system that creates abundance. We weaken the web that holds us. We break the cycle of giving and receiving that sustains all life. And the deepest teaching is this: the greed that drives us to take too much is itself a form of poverty. It is the poverty of not seeing clearly, not seeing that we already have enough, not seeing that the web that provides for us also provides for others, and that our well-being is inseparable from theirs, not seeing that the honey in the hive, the silence in the monastery, the quality in the clay, the fertility of the soil, these things are not ours to consume. They are ours to tend, to participate in, to receive with gratitude, and to pass on, undiminished, to whatever comes next. The Buddha called this clear seeing. In the Pali language, it is called vipassana, which means to see things as they really are. When we see clearly, we see that taking too much always costs more than it gains. We see that the short-term satisfaction of greed creates long-term suffering, not just for ourselves, but for everyone and everything connected to us. And we see that the alternative, the path of moderation, of care, of taking only what we need and leaving the rest, is not a path of deprivation. It is a path of abundance. Because when we tend the web instead of tearing it, the web provides, not extravagantly, not excessively, but sufficiently, steadily, reliably, season after season, breath after breath, life after life. Let us breathe together now. One more time. Breathe in, slowly. Feel the air enter you, cool and clean, carrying with it the quiet of this night, the peace of this moment, the gentle wisdom of these stories. Breathe out, slowly. Feel the warmth of your breath. Feel it carry away the last tension in your body. the last tightness in your mind, the last holding in your heart. Again. In, slowly, out, slowly. And now, let your breathing return to its own rhythm. You do not need to guide it anymore. You do not need to count it or measure it or think about it at all. It will continue on its own, as it has always continued, steady and faithful and endlessly patient, carrying you through the night, through the silence, through the deep and restful dark. Your body is so heavy now, so warm, so still. Feel the weight of your head on the pillow. Feel the weight of your arms on the bed. Feel the weight of your whole body held by the surface beneath you, held by gravity, held by the earth itself. The same earth that holds the fields and the forests and the rivers and the mountains and the monasteries and the villages and all the people and all the stories, all of them held, all of them resting, all of them part of the same web that holds you now. There is one more small story for tonight, a very short one, a story told in the quietest voice for the quietest hour. There once lived an old woman named Suki in a village so small it had no name. She was a gatherer of firewood. Each morning she walked into the forest with a length of rope and returned in the afternoon with a bundle of sticks on her back. She sold the sticks in the village for a few coins, enough for rice, enough for tea, enough for the small, quiet life she had built after her husband died and her children moved to the cities. Suki was not greedy. She had never been greedy, not because she was especially virtuous, but because she had never had enough to be greedy with. Her life was small, and her needs were small, and the distance between the two was so narrow that greed had never found a place to take root. One morning, walking her usual path through the forest, she found something at the base of a large stone, a cloth bag tied with string, heavy in her hand when she picked it up. She opened it. Inside were coins, more coins than she had ever seen in one place, more coins than she earned in a year, more coins than she could count standing there in the dappled morning light with the birds singing above her and the smell of pine and damp earth all around. She stood very still. She held the bag and felt its weight and looked at it and felt the stirring. That stirring. The same one Bharat had felt before the great hive. The same one Arvind had felt when he calculated his daughter's price. The same one Kavi had felt when he looked at the desperate faces on the riverbank. The same stirring that lives in every human heart. Not because we are bad, but because we are human. And being human means wanting. And wanting means being tempted to take more than we need. Suki felt it. She held the bag. She looked at the coins. And then she did something very simple. She looked around the forest. She looked at the path. She looked at the stone where the bag had been resting. And she thought about who might have lost it. Not who might have left it. Who might have lost it. Because a bag of coins at the base of a stone in a forest is not a gift from the universe. It is someone's loss, someone's savings, someone's future, wrapped in cloth and tied with string, and dropped perhaps in a moment of carelessness, or exhaustion, or haste. She picked up her rope. She picked up the bag. She walked to the village. She found the headman and gave him the bag. "Someone lost this on the forest path," she said, "near the large stone where the trail turns east." The headman looked inside the bag. His eyebrows rose. He looked at Suki. He looked at the bag again. "You could have kept this," he said. "No one would have known." Suki considered this. She was quiet for a moment, the way people in these stories are quiet when something true is forming in them. Not dramatic, not profound, just true. "I would have known," she said, "and the person who lost it would have known it was gone, and the space between those two knowings would have been a kind of suffering, mine for the keeping, theirs for the losing. Why would I create suffering where there was none?" The headman nodded slowly. He put the bag in the village strongbox and sent word along the trade routes that a sum of money had been found. 3 days later, a young merchant arrived. He was dusty and frantic and had clearly been retracing his steps for days. The bag was his entire season's earnings, meant to buy supplies for his family's shop. He had set it down to drink from the stream near the large stone and walked away without it. He counted the coins. Everyone was there. He looked at Suki, this small, weathered woman with her rope over her shoulder and her bundle of sticks, and something moved in his face. Not just gratitude, recognition. The recognition of something so rare that he had almost stopped believing it existed. He offered her a reward, a generous one, more coins than her sticks would earn in a month. Suki shook her head. "I did not find the money to be rewarded," she said. "I found the money because I walked that path every morning, and I returned it because it was not mine. There is nothing to reward in that. It is simply what is so." The merchant stood there for a long moment. He looked at his bag of coins. He looked at Suki. He looked at the village around him, the small houses, the dusty road, the goats wandering between the buildings. Such a small place, such a small woman, such a small act. And yet, he thanked her. He went on his way, and Suki went back to the forest to gather her sticks. Nothing changed in her life. She did not become wealthy. She did not become famous. She did not receive a visit from a wise teacher who told her she had passed a great test. She simply continued doing what she had always done, walking the forest path, gathering sticks, selling them for a few coins, drinking her tea in the evening, sleeping under a roof that leaked in the monsoon, but held firm the rest of the year. But something had changed in the village. The headman told the story. The merchant told it in every town he visited. And the story spread the way stories do, quietly, persistently, carried by voices that found it worth repeating, not because it was dramatic or extraordinary, but because it was simple, because it reminded people of something they already knew but had forgotten. Something about the difference between what we can take and what we should take. Something about the weight of a bag of coins in the hand and the lightness of setting it down. This last story has no dramatic teaching, no moment of crisis, no fall, and no redemption. It is simply the story of a woman who found something that was not hers and gave it back. And in that giving back, in that small, uncelebrated act of not taking, she demonstrated something that all our other stories have been circling around. The opposite of greed is not poverty. The opposite of greed is clarity. Seeing what is ours and what is not. Seeing what we need and what is excess. Seeing the web that connects us and choosing, in each moment, to tend it rather than tear it. Suki did not need a teacher to show her this. She did not need a flood or a broken pot or a depleted field. She simply saw clearly. She saw the coins, and she saw the person who had lost them, and she saw the suffering that would be created by keeping them. And she chose not to create that suffering, not out of virtue, not out of duty, out of clarity, out of seeing things as they really are. This is what the Buddha meant by the end of suffering, not the absence of pain, not the avoidance of loss, but the clarity to see each moment as it is and to respond with care instead of grasping, to hold lightly, to take only what is needed. to leave the rest for the bees, for the soil, for the silence, for the stranger on the forest path who will come looking for what they lost. We have come to the end of our journey tonight. We have walked through forests and fields, along rivers and roads, through villages and monasteries, and the quiet spaces of the human heart. We have seen what greed looks like when it takes root, how it grows, how it spreads, how it damages everything it touches, and we have seen what happens when it is recognized and released, not easily, not painlessly, but honestly, with the willingness to face what we have done and to begin, slowly, patiently, the work of restoration. You do not need to remember any of these stories. You do not need to carry their teachings with you into sleep. If something has settled into you, some image, some phrase, some feeling, let it stay. If nothing has stayed, that is fine too. The stories have done their work. They have moved through you like water through soil, and whatever has been absorbed will nourish in its own time, in its own way, without your effort or attention. Let everything go now. Let the stories go. Let the characters go. Let Bharat walk back into his forest, and Arvind sit with his silence, and Kavi row his boat, and Meera turn her wheel, and Vikash walk his path, and Amara kneel in her field, and Suki carry her sticks. They are at rest now, and you can rest with them. Feel your body, so heavy, so warm, so completely supported by the bed beneath you, by the darkness around you, by the night that holds everything, every house, every tree, every sleeping creature, in its vast and gentle arms. Your feet are resting. Feel them, warm and heavy and still. Your ankles, your calves, your knees, all resting, all releasing, all sinking deeper into the softness beneath you. Your thighs, your hips, the long muscles of your back, releasing their last holding, letting the bed take your full weight. You do not need to hold yourself up anymore. You do not need to hold anything up. Let it all rest. Let it all go. Your stomach rises and falls with each breath, so gently, so slowly. Your chest is open and soft. Your shoulders have dropped away from your ears. Your arms are heavy at your sides, your hands uncurled, your fingers loose and still. Your neck is soft. Your jaw is loose. Your lips are slightly parted. The muscles around your eyes have released completely, and your eyelids rest closed with the weight of deep, approaching sleep. Your forehead is smooth. Your scalp is relaxed. The very top of your head, the crown, feels open and light, as if the last bit of tension in your entire body has risen to this point and dissolved, like smoke dissolving into sky. You are resting now, deeply, completely. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to hear, nothing left to understand. You have been held tonight by stories and silence, by breath and stillness, by the ancient wisdom of people who saw clearly, and the gentle patience of a world that waits for us to see. The web holds you. The web has always held you. The bees and the flowers and the soil and the silence and the river and the clay and the people who tend them and the people who learn from them. All of it connected. All of it breathing. All of it resting now. As you rest, sleep well. Let the night carry you. Let your breath carry you. Let everything you heard tonight dissolve into the deep, quiet waters of sleep, where it will settle and rest, and in time, become part of you. The way rain becomes part of the river, and the river becomes part of the sea, and the sea becomes part of the cloud that rises and falls and rises again, endlessly, effortlessly, in the great turning wheel of all things. You are part of that wheel. You are held by it. You are carried by it. And tonight, You do not need to turn it. Tonight, you simply rest within it, still and warm and safe, while the wheel turns slowly, slowly, slowly around you. Sleep now. Rest now. Everything is complete. Everything is enough. You are enough. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk.